we might have to say, oh, our tax is going to have to go up on the employer side to 7% or 8%, right? We keep the statutory rates the same for the employees. We increase it on the employers.
Familiar with the Laffer curve?
Yeah.
So that right there just throws your premise into question.
No, it doesn't.
What, 6.2% is the magic revenue maximizing peak of the Laffer curve, and any percentage point above 6% on payroll taxes is going to be... It's going to decrease. What are you on about?
You said we're a service-based and consumer-based economy.
Sure.
How is that funded? Like, what do we produce that generates the products to be consumed?
This is the dumbest shit ever. We make, first of all, again, manufacturing output has been increasing. It's been, Fred, real manufacturing output.
Do you want to argue that we should cane people in public for violating the law?
Yes, conservative take. Yeah, no.
That's what Singapore does, and that's why they.
Well, that's not why they have
a nice urban downtown.
That's not why they have affordable housing, though.
Sure, it actually is.
Just a benefit.
No, it's not. Then come on, that's
Singapore has affordable housing because they cane people in this street. Like, oh my god. If you want to see more content like this, I would really appreciate you liking and subscribing. It really helps with the algorithm. And make sure to check out the Discord and other social links in the description. I didn't see them get too far into it during this debate, but like, I don't know, it looked like a lot of what they discussed is not necessarily the most unhinged Econoboi opinions of taxing 67% of GDP. It's just more like maybe we should have some universal cash transfers. Like,
let's start with the biggest government ever. What does that mean to you, big government and spending? Do you mean like deficit spending and unlimited budgets, or what?
Yeah, I joke about big government, obviously. I mean, I think that in principle, government should be as small as possible. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't have more government than you think you might need. But obviously, it's a debate about what the institution should really look like and how expansive they should be. I happen to believe in a pretty big welfare state. I think that part of the conceptual reason why we would always need a welfare state, essentially no matter what, is that one of the reasons why the bottom 20% are the bottom 20%. They're poor.
Why do you think redistribution is important? Econoboi is literally explaining it right now. A lot of people are basically just poor through no fault of their own. Or are poor temporarily, while they're, students aren't necessarily poor through no fault of their own. But like arguably students, shouldn't be working because they should be going to school and like becoming more productive members of society overall. So, market economies just fail to distribute any income to people who don't contribute factors of production. They don't give, capitalism is based on payments to factors of production, and people don't provide their factors, whether it be they don't provide labor or they don't provide capital, just don't get those factor payments, and markets fail to. That's not going to sell. What do you mean it's not going to sell? It's absolutely going to sell to most people. Students can take out loans. Well, that is true, but yeah. You can take out loans for school. I don't really. I mean, I guess you get a credit card for the essentials and everything, but yeah. But Econoboi is explaining it. He's going to say basically what I just said.
Is because they're overwhelmingly people who just don't work or they have trouble accessing the labor market, right? So we've got unemployed people, caregivers, elderly people, children, disabled people, students, right? And so fundamentally, in a market capitalist system, whether you like it or don't like it, there's not really a clean way, clearly, from across history, for essentially the market to get income to these people. And as well, since these people are unequally distributed, right? So if we were to imagine the same, two people, right? Identical twins, one makes 70 grand, the other makes 70 grand, they live in the same city. One of them lives completely alone, just in a studio apartment, and then the other one has like a child and a disabled spouse. Well, even though they have the same income, the person who has a child and a disabled spouse, which arguably is through no fault of their own, or at the very least we might say that children and people with disabilities should be taken care of, that person's going to be much poorer unless we provide disability benefits, child allowances, things like that.
Well, let me ask you, or why not just let them die?
Well, I mean, of course, that is always
Fabian.
Yeah, that is an intuition some people might have. I mean, I happen to, I believe in a state, I believe in having a government, I believe in some senses communitarianism and things like that. And so
you're a communist.
yeah, of course. No,
I am kidding.
No, I believe in community, right? And I think that part of believing in community is having these sort of, democratic procedures for voting for taxes and voting for institutions that distribute money to these people. And obviously the proof is in the pudding, right? When you have a welfare state that's well functioning, children aren't in poverty, the elderly aren't in poverty, people with disabilities aren't in poverty. The poverty rate in general just completely flatlines when you have a well functioning welfare state. And that's not what necessarily the US has, but I think that we should tend towards that direction, not strip.
Even in the US, I think I think Connor confuses poverty rates a little further into the debate, where he's like, oh, we spent a ton of money on welfare, but poverty rate didn't actually go down because the official poverty rate hasn't gone down, but that's because that's a relative poverty measure. If you use like the supplemental poverty rate, which is like a, like more, there's relative poverty measures and like, absolute poverty measures, I think. Those actually have gone down quite significantly with welfare, because obviously if you give people money, they aren't poor anymore. Believe it or not, guys.
But my argumentation effectively is going to be that, like, we have this schism in the United States of America, politically, culturally, et cetera, et cetera. Some may call it a civil war at times. But the but the issue is that in order for a welfare state to work, you need fiscal conservative and social conservative instincts. So one of the things that I see most often criticized about the welfare state, about Scandinavia, about the Pacific Northwest, about California, is perverse incentive systems where you effectively get people who are, I'm just going to say it, parasitic, dysgenic, and those might be like words that are loaded where it's like, oh, you're a fascist or whatever. But when you have generation after generation after generation that are on social benefit programs, they're not getting better, they're not integrated into the economy, they're taking wealth that could be used for more productive measures, et cetera, et cetera. We have to look at that, and we have to look at that as a systemic failure. And so that's where I don't begrudge fiscal conservatives who say we've spent billions or trillions of dollars on these programs and the stats have stayed almost the same, or social conservatives who are saying that we are incentivizing degenerate behavior.
So how do we have a system that protects the weak from just...
So I think Econo was going to mention this, but like a big way you get rid of a lot of the perverse incentives is just universalizing a lot of these programs and getting rid of like all the administrative fucking costs all the administrative burdens and everything that end up creating these welfare cliffs and like means test
being tossed out without creating generational dependencies.
Bullying.
Bullying.
Yeah, so this is it's going to be mostly a cultural argument because I think that people can already identify that we're arguing about like how big should the state be and what services should it provide. I have very specific like thoughts on that. But the thing is, like, what I get frustrated with the left, with liberals, with progressives, with leftists is that they don't seem to have any taste for saying, hey, no, you're actually screwing up. Hard drug use is terrible. Being a single parent, while not always your fault, is sometimes your fault. And here's all the pro-social behaviors that you should be taking part in, and then we should prioritize those as a society. And obviously, we're having a sensible conversation between sensible people. But as soon as we leave this room, we're kind of bombarded with messaging that says, oh, this is cis heteropatriarchal. This is right-wing. This is the gateway to fascism. When realistically, most people kind of have these social incentive structures in their lives, and they see the benefits and the downsides.
Yeah. I'm not so sure you guys are going to disagree on a lot of these, right? You don't want.
I can get pretty spicy pretty quick.
But you don't want dependent generations that aren't actually contributing, do you?
Well, it's an empirical question, right? So I think that where Connor is mistaken, and I think where a lot of people are mistaken on this, is that, you know, if we were to look at people who are born poor, right? So people born in kind of the bottom 20th percentile of people, this is a pretty poor group of people. I mean, they consume, it's about, last time I checked the data, there's about 1.6 people on average, obviously, in these households. They consume about $30,000 worth of things on an annual basis, right? So about, you know, call it $18,000 per person. So this is a pretty low income group of people. If we were to track those children and say, well, where do they end up as adults? You know, what you find is that the majority of them end up in a higher quintile than when they were born, right? And that's only after one generation. So typically between maybe 35 and 45% of people end up staying in the bottom 20th percentile, you know, as
Sorry, could you say that one again?
What specifically?
The people who stay in it.
Yeah, it's about 35 to 45%. Now that's only after one generation. So if we were to, you know, go from the parents to the children to the grandkids to the great grandkids, this sort of exponentially decreases, right? So in terms of the people who stay on benefits, the overwhelming majority of people who are on benefits kind of fall into two categories, right? We've got people who actually just need temporary help, and so they stay on benefits temporarily. Take food stamps, for instance. I think the average person stays on food stamps for less than a year, right? Now the people who stay on food stamps long term, they're overwhelmingly the people that I described in this group, not including the unemployed, right? These are people who simply struggle to work or have, you know, essentially an inability to work. They have disabilities. They're elderly. You know, they have caregiving responsibilities at home, and they don't have financial support. And so if we really want to support people into work, the best thing that we can do is get rid of the means tests. We can universalize these programs, and we can afford to do that if we just had a better tax system. But kicking people off of their benefits, especially with this concept of, well, I want to prevent generational poverty. Number one, generational poverty, especially after multiple generations, is really not that common. And to the extent that it is, it's because these people have essentially ailments, right? They have disabilities. They're just old at a certain point, right? Like, you know, these things happen and it plunges people into poverty.
Yes. Sorry,
you guys believe in evolution?
I do.
I do.
That wasn't a trick question. I know some people.
This is the dumbest fucking... Tim Pool does this a few times during this debate, and it fucking pisses me off.
People don't. And I asked this because we would
It's
then...
like a total... I don't want to say this one is a total derail, but...
that humans...
It's somewhat off topic, and it's also a dumb point.
...are constantly in the process of evolution. Evolution is not like one day a duck has a baby, it's an alligator, right? Over long periods of time, genetic traits do confer
like
changes in a species, in an animal. And so I'm curious if you think it is, I suppose, macro enough that if you have a group of people that are incapable of producing more than they consume, if you prop up this group of people, they will create more people incapable of producing more than they consume.
Well, this is a JF
lowest IQ people are most concerned about the genetic quality of the population.
I mean, I think that...
Well, can I address something real quick that you just said, though, and then we'll do genetic evolution. So social evolution. So, okay, I hear what you're saying, where you're saying that over generations, 35 to 45% of the people actually end up staying on it, and as a result, over the course of a matter of time, there's going to be less and less people on it, or the people have more opportunities.
That was just people who they stayed poor, not necessarily people who stayed on benefits, but that would be even less people.
But while I was researching this, because obviously there's, I would say, a liberal or progressive bias to search engines. One of the things that I found is that with the stickiness of social benefits, oftentimes what happens is people, they will, because there are time limits stuck to these social benefits, oftentimes around 5 years, what happens is people will go off, go on, go on, go off, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's effectively this wave of them doing it. And getting to Tim's point about whether or not we're incentivizing like an antisocial element of our society, that's actually specifically what I'm arguing about. Because I think that there's a resentment from the middle class and the working class who are like, just barely surviving, paying bills, getting by, all that kind of stuff. And then they see this, I hate to say,
Ace Mogul Robinson. Wait, what is that paper about?
But true, parasitic class of people who are jumping back and forth on benefits over and over again, and sometimes it is intergenerational. Even in your own statement, it's 35 to 45% of the
after one generation, right? So the point that I say
doesn't that carry over to subsequent generations, and so as a result, majority of people are getting off of the benefits, but there's still a third that stay on.
Well, I'm just talking about people who stay in the bottom 20%, right? So it's again the people who stay in the bottom 20% is necessarily a bigger group of people than are actually on benefits, right? Or at the very least, we could say that the kind of people that you're describing is a smaller group than the entirety of the bottom 20%, because not everyone takes benefits.
Can we all be more like Scandinavians? Asymmetric growth in institutions in an independent world. Oh man. Because there are more limited inequality and more comprehensive social welfare systems, many perceive average welfare to be higher in Scandinavian societies than in the United States. Why then does the U.S. not adopt Scandinavian-style institutions? More generally, in an independent world, would we expect all countries to adopt the same interdependent world? Would we expect all countries to adopt the same institutions? To provide theoretical answers to this question, we develop a simple model of economic growth in a world in which all countries benefit and potentially contribute to advances in the world technology frontier. A greater gap in incomes between successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs, thus inequality, increases entrepreneurial effort and hence a country's contribution to the world technological frontier. We show that under plausible assumptions, the world equilibrium is asymmetric. Some countries will adopt for a cutthroat capitalism that generates greater inequality and more innovation and will become the technology leaders, while others will free ride on the cutthroat incentives of the leaders and choose a more cuddly form of capitalism. Paradoxically, those with cuddly reward structures, though poorer, may have higher welfare than cutthroat capitalists, but in world equilibrium, it is not a best response for the cutthroat capitalists to switch to a more cuddly form of capitalism. We also show that domestic constraints from social democratic parties or unions may be beneficial for a country because they prevent cutthroat capitalism domestically instead of inducing other countries to play this role. Maybe he misread it to mean that economic equality rather than political democracy leads to growth. I think Econoboi's point would be, I've talked to him about this before, that I don't know, from the evidence he's seen at least, he seems to think that we can have a much more equal society without really any major negative impacts on growth, especially from, and this is what he's based on. I'm sorry, guys, but he's just right. Socializing resource rents, okay? You can socialize rents, and that's I think he said that's $3 trillion or something, which I don't know if I believe him, but I haven't read this one yet. Land value tax. 15% of GDP. DVCFT is not necessarily rents, but sovereign wealth fund. 4.1 trillion. Anyway.
We have a very complicated system for even getting the benefits. Obviously, as a veteran, you can probably relate to that somewhat, right?
It actually got better in the past decade, believe it or not.
Well, I think so. Biden and Trump, I guess.
It's gone down, the consumption of welfare? What do you mean?
I was just talking about the VA, Veterans Affairs.
Oh, right.
So basically, a decade ago, I would have had all the nightmare stories that everybody was talking about. You walk in, you can't see anybody, you get a 6-month appointment. Right. They basically just say, hey, hopefully you don't kill yourself. Good luck. Yeah. That's what I experienced 10 years ago.
In Canada?
Yeah, they'd be like, hey, maybe kill yourself.
Well, I mean,
I'm going to write that down because that's another...
Well, that is where ultimately I end up going with my question.
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me? We're going to go to... What estatism is gonna make everyone kill them? Jesus, kill me. Actually, give me made. Then I'd say the reason why evidence shows you can be a well-grown social democracy is that there are cutthroat capitalist countries that they free ride on. I'm against economic rents and support redistributing them more efficiently. It's just I support good things and oppose bad things. Very true. Well, UBI does help with growth since in a lot of places though. I don't know. Well, UBI does help with growth since in a lot of places though. I don't know exactly what you're trying to say. It's just going to depend how you fund the UBI. I mean, obviously, if you fund a UBI through resource rents, that's presumed that's almost certainly going to be positive for growth. But presumably you could fund, a UBI through wealth taxes, and that might be net negative growth, even if it increases the welfare of the bottom 20%. Or you could fund it through what's a worse tax than wealth tax? Hard to think of such a thing. I don't know. If you tax fucking positive externalities, then it would be bad for growth.
Because are we incentivizing bad behavior, and then at the end of the day, are we saying, hey, maybe kill yourself?
Well, but Connor, I think we have to stay clear with, again, like what I think is the fundamental purpose of the welfare state, right? So we have to look at this group of people, right? Unemployed, caregivers, elderly, children, disabled people, students. There's no bad behavior in any of that list of things, right?
Like when wealth tax. That's probably, yeah, that's true actually. Well, I mean, obviously depends on how high. Like I would say, like a 2% wealth tax is probably worse than like a 10% tariff on steel, but 20% universal tariffs versus the 2% wealth tax, I'm probably almost certainly choosing the wealth tax there.
Conservatives and social conservatives wouldn't necessarily have that beef with it. What they would
almost like we have to, guys. I figured it out, guys. Think on the margin. Holy shit, I figured it out. Holy shit. W's in chat.
With is number one, the parasitic people that we're talking about, and number two, they would have questions about like how do we enable society in order to actually support these people. Fiscal conservatives are some of them. I hate them viciously. They're like, well, not with my tax dollars. Those people drive me crazy and up the wall. But social conservatives basically say, as an example,
even better than using resource rents for UBI, you can just pay down a debt. Well, I guess, you can do that as well, but that'd probably be pro growth. Yeah, but I wasn't considering that. I wasn't talking about the U.S. I was just talking about it in general, but.
This 35 to 45%, and you're not saying that all of them are bad. Some of them are disabled. Some of them are taking care of family.
Overwhelming majority.
Yeah. But the point is that what social conservatives are concerned with is that there does exist a subclass of people who effectively just use benefits as their employment, and so they bounce out on and off of the system over and over again.
There's multiple reasons for.
There just aren't one. It just doesn't seem to be that big of a subset of people. I'm sure Econoboi has better numbers than I do, and two, the solution for a lot of those things is like getting rid of some of the means tests that create these like welfare traps, or welfare cliffs. Yeah.
For that, right? So there's multiple reasons for that. So obviously, like you said, benefits are complicated. Some people fall off. Different administrations come in, so people fall off and get back on benefits. Now, again, I have to keep going back to this is a minority of people, and of the people who stay on benefits, again, the overwhelming majority are these people that I just described. Now, for the people that you're describing, it's kind of like, these able-bodied people who don't have any sort of responsibilities.
They might not be able-bodied. They might be. Sorry, real quick. Yeah. There are people who we were talking about evolution, which obviously I don't think that you can do that in a few generations. But there are people who are legitimately disabled. But the reason why they're disabled is because they have bad life habits. They have drug addictions. They have lower back pain because they're obese. They do things that effectively ruin their lives physically, mentally, spiritually. And then they expect people to perpetuate their existence. And I think that's what a lot of people
I have to imagine that there's some completely insane distortionary taxes used by developing countries that are worse than wealth tax, corporate income tax, and tariffs. There are a few developing countries with like very high tariffs, but I don't know what a lot of these developing countries are doing that fucks them over so badly. Like
just a physical issue. It's also like a spiritual, motivational, cultural issue.
Let me just step away from the genetic component of what I asked, but also, as you mentioned, the social component. If there are people, I'm not gonna say if. There's a viral video where a woman says, "Here's the food I make for my 7-year-old." She's morbidly obese, and she's taking a bunch of chicken nuggets, and she's doing like 50 nuggets.
Like I understand what Tim Full is saying, but it's just so fucking goofy. I'm just trying. Do they have corporate tax? I don't know if there's a minimum tax of 1% for companies other than micro size and small. Although I would assume the compliance rate in a lot of these countries is also like totally shit. But
and then she's like putting oil on them, then deep frying them, and then she's putting like whipped cream on ice cream. She's like, "This is what I give to my kids every day." If you have bad practices outside of genetics, their children are going to be on benefits too. And then a society.
I mean, they view these things as connected issues, but like I'm always inclined to view them as like almost entirely separate issues. I think Econoboi does a decent job at describing it here. It's like, well, the fundamental point of the welfare state, get income to people who ordinarily wouldn't get income. If we want to have social goals like, reducing obesity, well, it makes perfect sense that we would also have, for example, tax sugar, maybe subsidize healthier food or whatever, tax alcohol, things like that, have regulations over things. That seems to make a lot more sense than a lot of these like weird administrative means tests that we have for people, or just saying, well, these welfare benefits aren't worth it because a minority of people seem to be abusing it and feeding too many cookies to their children or whatever. Like
that says, "Don't worry, it's fine. We got you." Eventually, you get a lot of these people that will create more people.
I know fertility is down. A new wealth tax? No, don't they already tax like 67% of GDP or whatever? What the fuck? France is the country Econoboi wants to live in, and it's horrible.
But presuming that people are going to have children, they're going to perpetuate that cycle.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, so we have to kind of segregate the conversation here, including I can kind of
Solidarity, tax, and wealth. Holy fucking shit. What the hell? Oh, this is gone now? Replaced in 2017?
include what Connor just said about people with disabilities who might have, maybe it's their fault that
The
they're
window
just-
tax, or the property tax in England. Oh, yeah, I've heard of the window tax, right? People just board up their windows to avoid paying the... They got Zuckman and Saez on, I think. Wait, what? Oh, on it, I think. Oh, yeah, and for the France wealth tax. It doesn't even, some of the assumptions that they make, Saez and Zuckman make, wouldn't even make sense to do in a French setting, right? Because, like, they say, like, oh, I know they count health insurance benefits as a tax, which, like, seems kind of dumb. But they say, like, oh, you know, ordinarily this would be something done by the state and just included in your taxes, and, like, so we're going to count it as a tax in the American context. I don't know, it seems a little stupid, but...
disabled or something like that.
Doesn't make sense
so
to do in France,
obviously,
'cause
if you wanted to
it's
say, well, we should have
tax.
certain rules by which people qualify. Like, obviously, if you were to say, like, oh, I sprained my ankle, so give me $1,000 a month in disability, right? I think most people would say, well, that does sound a little ridiculous, right? And so you might have a list of rules, and every country that has disability benefits has.
Should bald people be allowed to create more bald people? That's a really tough question. I don't know. I would say yes. But people with southern accents, like deep southern accents, Jesus, absolutely should not be able to reproduce.
Different qualifications, and some things count and some things don't. So, you know, you have to figure out the details here, right? But at the end of the day, what I'm making an argument for is kind of twofold, right? One is the principal argument that we need a welfare state to support people with all of these groups of people, but obviously also inclusive of that, people with disabilities, right? The market fails these people. We cannot leave the market to its own devices. These people will just be poor and in poverty.
Quick interjection. Did you hear about fraternal societies in the early 20th century?
I did watch that debate. Okay. My response would just be that I think that people, anarchists who rely on that are, I think, misunderstanding a lot of that history. But
That's being polite. Can you be ruder?
well, I mean, it kind of goes to your point, though, Connor. When you said that, you know, we need this culture of just like bullying people and telling people to, you know, I hate to say pick themselves up by their bootstraps, but, you know, similarly, like we just need to tell people to like man up, go get a fucking job, right? That kind of thing. Now, I think that in general, we can kind of do a time series here and look at when we didn't have welfare, right? When we didn't have
I don't
welfare,
think
this
so.
kind of culture
No,
did
they're
exist,
grand
and
designs.
getting welfare benefits was a political, you know, trial and experiment. People advocated for it, people shot it down. Eventually, we get Social Security. Eventually, we get Medicare. Eventually, we get Medicaid. All these kind of different things, right? Now, pre-welfare, you saw so much writing like this, right? There was this culture where, oh, if you have to take any money from the government, you're just a bum, lazy piece of garbage or whatever, right? If you have to take money from charity, you know, some conservatives say, oh, well, charities will just fill the gap that welfare takes. Well, back when we had the kind of culture you're describing, people said even if you take money from charity, you're a bum loser and you shouldn't do that. And charities are in fact bad because it creates the kind of culture that you're talking about. Now, the last thing I was going to say, one last sentence, was that we
I feel as though paid well is defined based on the ability to secure benefits, etc. What do you mean?
had that culture and poverty was really high, right?
I
We had
can't hear you. What do you mean? You didn't fucking hear me.
high level of poverty. Once we institute state welfare benefits, guess what? All the people who qualified for them, the poverty rates declined precipitously. They continue to decline all the way up until the 90s and 2000s when benefits kind of bottomed out.
So
Oh, no.
honest question. Why not let them die?
Well, philosophically, like I said, I mean, I have a kind of intuition about, you know, a sense of community and a value of human life, right?
Oh, it's in French. Fuck these people. It's like fantastic. Wait, what? Oh, this is new. Oh no. Doesn't France literally already tax like 60% of GDP? Man up or Minecraft yourself for real. France taxes as percentage of GDP. 48%. I thought it was more, or 43%. I thought it was more than that. Wait, how does France run? Huge France. That's a GDP. Do they have big deficits? Oh, I didn't know their fucking deficit was that big. Your volume was too low when you responded to my message. Is it good now? Is it? I mean, I have the thing. I don't want to have it peak when I yell. We need a ban on French economists. Very true. What do you think a ban on all European economists? Honestly.
Now, you know, I'm not a religious person, right? So, you know, people have different justifications for their moral views, but, you know, I think just letting somebody with like a disability starve and die and live a worse life, I guess selfishly you could say that by forcing, there was an interesting study about Social Security that talked about this. By having Social Security benefits, for instance, it allows elderly people to live more independently from their parents, or from their, not their parents, from their kids, I should say.
families?
Yeah, from their families, right? Now, some
There was a reason why they wanted to put your retirement age up. They can't afford it. Yeah, I remember that whole controversy, but I didn't remember if that. I didn't remember that their deficit being that big.
Conservatives might say that that's a bad thing, but then some conservatives...
I was literally
Well,
about to say
but
that.
at the same time, a lot of conservatives, like I saw Dennis Prager make a video similar to this, where he said, well, actually, the thing that we want is for people to be individualistic. You know, we want people to kind of atomize. Now, that's a debate in the conservative community. My only point was that by not having these benefits, we create a lot of financial burdens for the broader community. And I don't think that living in forcing elderly people to live in the house of their children necessarily...
In Germany, it's the most fiscally conservative economist you could imagine. Yeah, it's funny that Germany has... Krugman has a short article about this. Germany has like a budget surplus, and like it has a trade surplus as well. It's got a good, strong manufacturing sector, and it's just like not a... It's just not... Its growth is just not strong at all. It's been basically flat since COVID. It just sucks. I mean, there are plenty of other good things about Germany. Their healthcare is good, okay? I'm sure they might even have better welfare than us, okay? But they don't got the growth.
means that you have better or worse community. It just means elderly people are living in higher levels of poverty, right? And
Or
I
the
think that's just
children,
bad.
or the children live in the house of their parents.
You've kind of steered it for a second, so I want to steer some of this, okay? So you actually kind of steered into a point that I wanted to make. So support people who the market does not support, okay? I am a statist, so ultimately I do believe that women who are raising children are not like drags on our society. They're actually a pro-social component of our society, and it's important that they raise healthy, happy, productive children for all of
People are just fucking leaving my city like crazy, and I don't really know why.
our sakes, and especially the sake of the future. Now, if we wanted to say, because I feel like we could circle the, you know,
case the next
well, there's all these people who actually do
too.
deserve these benefits. I think that a actual principled social conservative, if they think about it for 30 seconds, they don't want women to be starving, they don't want the kids to be starving, and they do want people who are productive to kind of get back into society, reintegrated, and supported.
Okay? I think
If a social conservative thinks for more than 30 seconds, they'll do that. Fiscal conservatives, maybe not so much. Now, because they'll say, not with my money. Now,
Because of their debt break? What do you mean by that exactly? I don't know I know they refuse to fucking deficit spend.
We're talking about pro-social and anti-social behavior, which I think is like another component of this. We're not just making fiscal arguments. We're not only talking about taxes, debt, all that kind of stuff. The other thing that we're talking about is pro-social stuff. And what's actually interesting is, this is something that I bumped into during research for this, is since the advent of the welfare state, which I guess we could say is like the 40s, I guess, we've actually seen a drop in labor force participation rate, which is effectively people who participate in the economy. But the place where it was most pronounced was actually men over the age of 55. So all the boomers who are telling us, like, pick yourself by the bootstraps, you know, you got to work until you're dead, never take social benefits, blah, 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 blah. If you actually look at it, you see old people effectively stop working as soon as they hit 55, and you see like a 20% decrease. So I wanted to
talk to Ophelia about her bad experience with German medical. She suffered eye infection. German healthcare is pretty good no matter what. Yeah, no offense, Ophelia. I don't know if you're watching, but from what I've read, it seems pretty good. And I don't give a fuck about your personal experience, nor the opinion of any woman, for that matter.
Point out that irony, but
why is that ironic? I don't know.
Why is it ironic?
You're saying it's ironic for the conservatives. Like,
yeah, because that's the generation that tells
What's
us the
your
most that we
opinion
just need to
of
work
growth through consumer spending and the lack thereof being the biggest problem? I don't have any issue in principle with growth being driven by consumer spending. I think that seems to be what happens in, most major economies as they develop. I don't know what you mean by lack thereof being the biggest problem, but
butts off, whereas they are the people who are participating in the economy less and less.
So I have a question.
I think societal unequal strengths has a lot more to do with inequality and poverty. The more avenues building wealth are blocked, the more potential success. That might be true in developing countries. Like in the U.S., there are just like not that many. There are just not that many like barriers to that. Even in European countries where there are more barriers to that, like you don't see high poverty just because they spend money to reduce poverty.
When Social Security was first launched, I believe it was 5 workers were needed to prop up 1 recipient. Based on the scale of benefits and the buying power, as of today, it's 2.1 on average. It's the latest data that goes into paying a Social Security recipient. People on Social Security do not get paid enough to actually sustain a standard of living. And we expect by 2035, Social Security to reach not necessarily insolvency, but the point at which it can only pay out what...
The Econoboi mentions, what he should here. He mentions 1, there's been productivity growth. 2, we could do immigration. But 3, he's like, again, the fundamental point to the welfare state, get income to people who otherwise wouldn't get income. It seems like you guys aren't disagreeing with that. You're just saying like this particular thing isn't sustainable. I'm just saying like for the income we have in society, can we get income to, some of that income to people who ordinarily want to get it under like a total market system or whatever. But also the real chat take would just be, get rid of Social Security, or turn Social Security into a sovereign wealth fund. Okay, just get rid of the payroll tax. Okay, have our retirement system just be funded by resource rents. Okay, you should have said that. That would have been a base take. When I was doing on a tonsil issue, the NHS guy in England took one look and said probably cancer, GG's. Then my parents took me to German healthcare, and the German doctors basically said the British doctors were retarded and they were just inflamed. Based. Extreme example, but children are poor because they're not allowed to work. True. We should unban child labor. Yes. Now you're getting me, Seahorse. Yes. Pro child labor. Yes. Why did Econoboi think of this? They're constrained in their means of survival depending on the parents and the state. Yeah, but I mean, obviously the point of that is, you know, it seems like overall society can be richer if children go to school and learn skills and, you know, become higher productivity later on because of the knowledge that they got from school and everything, rather than just, you know, working in a fucking sweatshop at like 10 years old. Right now, growth is driven by I and G rather than C, leading to an inefficient allocation of I don't think that's true. I mean, number one, I'm pretty sure C is typically the larger component of GDP, like, leading to inefficient allocated resources since there's nowhere for investment to go and no way for it to be realized. That's just not true. Thoughts on investment for sovereign wealth funds selling bonds? Thoughts on investment for sovereign wealth funds selling bonds? I don't know what you mean by that.
Goes in, which is 77%. So either they
only France where illegal would have a lot more unsuccessful people, women, etc. The barriers to that industry are removed, and a lot of, I mean, again, I don't entirely disagree with you, but it just seems like even in countries where presumably I would assume a lot of European countries probably have more barriers to doing things like that than the U.S. Why do you think it's not true? Let's just look. Yeah, too much of GDP. Like just look at the GDP now. It just doesn't seem. First of all, I don't know why having growth being driven. Or I don't think it necessarily follows that because growth is being driven by I and G, that's a like inefficient allocation of resources or whatever. But two, it just doesn't seem like that's the case. I think this article even has like look how big consumption is typically the biggest thing. It's not the biggest thing here because a lot of this investment is like inventories being built up. But like consumption is biggest here. Investment seems to be bigger than government spending a lot of times even.
They have to increase taxes or they have to cut Social Security. Now, on top of this, Gen Z is smaller than the millennials, and Gen Alpha is about half the millennials. Estimated around 40 million people. And
Gen Alpha isn't done being born yet, right? So.
And to end, if we want to extend the generation by a couple of years, the high estimate may be 48 million.
Yeah.
In 10 years, we are not going to have a labor force that can fund a welfare state.
Sorry, if you let me drive for a moment. So this is where we need to change the expectations, at least in my opinion. We're going to have to do this just for survival, okay? We're going to have to reset expectations around what people can materially expect out of the state and what they can expect out of the economy. We are going to have to become extended family units again. We are going to have to work together as a community in order to survive. We are going to have to adopt pro-social behaviors from the early 20th and late 19th century just to survive. Because that's an economic calamity that literally, if we try to pay for people to live in 1,400 square foot single-family homes by themselves, they're going to end up eating cat food in their pets because they're not going to be able to survive.
So we need to, yeah, I mean,
we can't rely on the government benefits. This is effectively like an economic implosion.
Well, I've eaten cat food before.
Cat food.
I have indeed.
In order to survive or as a joke?
At a party, someone bet $20 for me to eat cat food, and I did it for free.
It looks suspiciously like tuna, so I mean, it's not impossible.
Literally is tuna, and there's no salt, so it's very bland.
Okay. Well, hold on.
No one needed to know that.
But I want you to, so Econoboi, so far, you've argued that the people that I'm targeting or want to target are the parasitic elements of society are not that big of a deal. It's not a big deal. But what Tim kind of
just
said,
to be clear, it's not that it's not a big deal in some conceptual sense. It's just that if you just look at the people who are consistently poor, it's all these people who I would say don't exactly exhibit bad behavior, right?
But this is actually, Tim kind of brought up a point that
I don't agree with that, but
yeah, Tim brought up a point that I think is very pertinent to the conversation, where effectively, like, it's the conservatives who are pro-natal. We want kids. We want the human species to perpetuate. We're the people who like want pro-social behaviors to be implemented over and over and over again, and hopefully we'll be around as a species in 100,000 years. So if we're looking at I don't know what you said, like a 40% cut in the population, something like that.
There are 72 million millennials, 69 million Gen Z,
okay,
40 million Gen Alpha, and Gen Alpha is ending this year. Caveat: Gen Alpha is slightly shorter than previous generations. So if you want to add a few years, because it's based on labor cycles of 18-year-olds, then we could estimate Gen Alpha to be about 48 million. Or let's just say the next generation of workers. We're also currently right now facing what's called the demographic cliff, because when the Great Recession happened, a dramatic drop in fertility occurred those 2 years, which means for the next couple of years, we're expecting a major drop off in 18-year-olds. So currently, right now, we're facing a gap of 16 to 18-year-olds. So that's entry-level work and labor for businesses. And we're starting to see businesses actually close because they can't find entry-level talent.
I'm not convinced. Most of that stuff is, somewhat true, and Econoboi does address it, obviously. But I'm also like, are businesses really? First of all, how many are businesses closing more than usual, and how much of that is attributable to, fucking the decline in entry level labor? I'm not convinced that is the biggest driver of that, but
labor.
And if you look at the population distribution, there's a natural
Nonfon
element
is
to this
Gen
of
Goon.
the boomers into the X, right? Because the baby boom post World War II, and then X being a smaller generation. However, what I'm saying is if this S curve distribution is going down, then it kind of doesn't matter what we're arguing about from a welfare state perspective. We literally will not be able to afford it without automation, without extreme amounts of automation.
But real quick, sorry, just a quick point. Automation.
Just let Econoboi speak. Let Econoboi speak. But we have been automating. Productivity has increased, quite a bit. Maybe not enough to fully offset the, decline in workers. But again, as Econoboi will mention, if you just let my boy speak, welfare just entails that, for the income that we have to distribute it in some way to get it to people who wouldn't get income under a market system.
Still is going to be owned by someone, and that means new taxes on automated systems. One proposal is that if Uber intends to fully automate its fleet, they would have to pay a substantial amount of taxes.
Yeah.
People are saying like 30% on top of
Effectively payroll tax for robots.
Yes.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, those are many different conversations. I think that we, again, have to segregate the conversation. So fundamentally, even if you have a declining population, and for some reason we don't want to let in immigrants, and obviously, I think there's some analysis on
We can
that.
let in pro-social immigrants. I'm a civic nationalist ultimately.
My point is, even if we were to assume, obviously I think immigration is a solution to that problem, especially in the medium term, essentially. Now, even if we don't agree with that, right? Even if we say, okay, we're not going to let in immigrants and, the population's declining, we still have fundamentally two things that enable the welfare state to exist, right? We have an amount of money and distribution of income in society. There's still going to be workers. There's still going to be people with disabilities, the elderly people,
Bubby?
this and that, right? And we're still going to need a way to give them some
many
level
modern
of money.
problems
Now,
stem from
obviously,
boomers.
you might say,
True.
similar to Japan, right? We might have a declining population.
Tax use a shovel, a spoon digging for. I know the automation tax is a little away. I understand. Technically, if you're saying automation is this thing that's going to allow us to fund the welfare state, it is kind of weird that you also say you want to fucking tax it or whatever. But whatever. Has Econoboi mentioned inequality yet? Not yet. I've not had to take a shot yet. Don't worry. Why's my Discord? Hold on. Give me a second. No, I did not mean to do that. No. Why did I do that? No. Fuck. Whatever. Automation tax is one of the most retarded possible tax. I don't know if they literally meant a tax on automation or if they meant I don't think Tim Pool knows what a DBCFT is, but a tax on the companies doing automation, tax on the super normal returns,
prices are going down instead of up, deflation's happening, we might need to cut benefits for that reason, or because maybe tax burdens would get so bad for the economy or whatever. Yeah, whatever. That's a very practical conversation. But principally speaking, there's no reason to think that, because we have a declining population, even if we don't let in immigrants, which is the big caveat, and I guess technology doesn't get substantially better, right? So those are two big caveats, that we would obviously just get rid of the entirety of the
you cannot restrain possible means of income plus production to relatively few options. Expect everyone to be the uniformly productive machine. It's so true. Again, it just really seems like in countries that spend more in welfare, there is less poverty, primarily because they spend more in welfare and not, even if European countries probably have more barriers to being successful.
Cut it back to a quarter of what it was. No, we would still have a pretty sizable welfare state under those circumstances, and we should, we should have.
Well, okay, so now we're talking about policy, but you've given me a couple of things. So I stand by what I said earlier, which is effectively we need to reimagine what the golden years look like, which is right now, it's effectively having your retirement from, this is a boomer thing, this isn't even a millennial thing. Millennials don't think they're going to retire, they think they're going to work until they're dead. But
Someone said welfare system is actually going to old people, basically subsidizing the last 30 years of their lives, just increase their retirement age massively. Truth, no. We should, I wonder if Econoboi disagrees with this, that we probably should increase the retirement age, but this is my compromise. Don't increase the retirement age, but privatize Social Security. This is my compromise. That's what I'll agree to.
The boomers, they effectively think that with social benefits plus retirement, they should be able to spend 2 decades effectively not working, and they should be able to maintain their 1,500 square foot house on a quarter acre lot. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I think that
why are we looking at Q2 of 2024 in Canada? What the fuck? Okay. Presumably, that's not a normal situation for Canada, even if I would expect in Canada government spending contributes to GDP more than it does in the U.S. and a lot of other countries, but
and maybe it shouldn't because it's probably
but
relatively
it's
speaking
fine. I didn't realize I'm in debt.
What probably should happen is we
Fuck
should
ton
get
of
more
money.
used to
What
extended
happened?
family groups, living in properties next to each other, family compounds, all that kind of stuff. Now that doesn't mean that you need to be in tenement housing like the 19th century, where you're sleeping with your wife and then your parents are in the next room.
Willy Wonka.
Yeah, like no, you don't need to have your. Well, I forget grandpa's name, but like you don't have grandpa in 3 degenerates.
Can't predict
sleeping
we
with
working like 20-hour work weeks or something by now. Yep, we have long work hours to fund boomer retirements. Unfortunate.
grandpa in bed all day, 2 feet away from you. That's not what we're talking about. But at the
Saying
same
the
time, we're
US
gonna have to
is
find a dignified
exceptional?
shift to this.
I don't know how I mean, I think I don't know. I would guess the difference between us and most Western European countries is like, I don't know, maybe 10% of GDP is like is probably like a 10-20% difference or whatever. Oh, I'm with you, Nonfon. I'm saying society literally doesn't depend enough on its people to maximize productivity on innovation. Truth, nuke.
And this is where I'm going to challenge the fiscal and social conservatives in the chat. I don't feel they're ready to have that conversation because they're typically the people who are doing better economically, so they will still be able to afford that life through their income. And so they're basically saying, well, the rest of society can buzz off. But what I'm saying is that population collapse, immigration...
This is literally like Connor's argument, but... I just got you open for the view, but when you're done, DM me and tell me if this supports a watch or not. Oh,
Stopgap. And then the money distribution being taxed so heavily that we can still support our welfare state. These are meteors that are coming for our culture, whether you like it or not.
That's not true, though, because, again, we can look at societies that have higher rates of taxation, more generous retirement benefits, right? Well, I don't know how much Scandinavia taxes to fund their pension system, honestly. It depends. I was just thinking specifically about Germany, right? So Germany has, I think, 10% payroll taxes. Obviously, here we have about 6.2%. That's on the employee side. On the employer side, 6.2%. In Germany...
Dude, this is so funny. Like I said, I watched about half of this live. I didn't even hear a lot of it, but... Oh my God, this made me want to jump off a bridge.
Yeah, I think it might be 10 and 10. And so, we have examples of societies that have substantially higher payroll taxes to fund social benefits, right? And we don't see like, oh, the economy collapses. We don't see like, oh, so many terrible antisocial things happen in these countries because of the high payroll taxes. In the United States, right, we could do 2 things to fill this gap that you're talking about. So like Tim said, in 2035 or 2033 or whatever year it is, benefit, the trust fund is scheduled to decrease, right? So scheduled to go to 0. All that means is that the accumulated money from Social Security, the trust fund aspect of Social Security goes to 0. It doesn't mean we don't have any money for Social Security. I'm just explaining for the audience, right? And then if that happens, benefits go to 75% of their current levels. So we can still pay out 75% of the inflation-adjusted benefits come 2033, 2035. Now, if you wanted to raise all of that money with our current demographics, right, all you'd have to do is get rid of the cap on Social Security, right? So right now, there's a cap. If you make more than $150,000 a year, you don't pay any extra Social Security tax on any of that income. Very regressive way to do things. If we got rid of that cap, and then we said, we might have to say, our tax is going to have to go up on the employer side to 7% or 8%, right? We keep the statutory rates the same for the employees. We increase it on the employers. We've solved this entire gap. And this is not calamitous. Just 1 second. This is not calamitous. This is not, a Great Depression is going to happen. None of that. And if we're smart and we just allow in immigrants, which we've been doing, there's 50 million foreign-born people in this country, we would completely avoid even the tax increase.
Are you familiar with the Laffer curve?
Yeah.
So that right there just throws your premise into question.
No, it doesn't. Because the Laffer curve,
Dude, Econoboi said take the employer side payroll tax from 6% to 8%. He said, he said from 6% to 7% or 8%. So a 1 or 2% increase. And Tim Pool says Laffer curve. Laffer curve? Are you fucking kidding me? You think that what 6.2% is the magic revenue maximizing peak of the Laffer curve, and any percentage point above 6% on payroll taxes is going to decrease what are you on about? What the fuck are you doing?
Idea of the Laffer curve is you raise taxes to such an erroneously high level that people all of a sudden start dropping out of the labor force precipitously.
Not erroneous high level. An example I can give you that I personally experienced is in Cook County when they raised the taxes by 0.2.
Well, I was talking to I think I was in VC with Micah once, co-hosted a 3 Wonks podcast with Econoboi, and he was telling me Econoboi sounds like Sanders in 2016. Truth nuke. He was telling me that the labor supply elasticity to import. Jesus, I'm so used to talking about tariffs and trade. To payroll taxes is higher than Econoboi and SDL like to admit, but I don't know what he was citing for that. Why am I looking at this?
5% contract labor left to DuPage County.
Well, that's because of an anti-competitive tax measure, not because taxes were too high.
Have you thought about the Laffer curve? Checkmate, soy-tard. Yeah, I know. It's like...
Obviously, if you have free flow of labor and capital, like between counties do, you have to be more sensitive about your tax planning.
So you're going to need tariffs to maintain this?
No. There's no tariffs between
This was so fucking funny, too.
county.
County.
Well, that's because of an anti-competitive tax measure, not because taxes were too high. Obviously, if you have free flow of labor and capital, like between counties do, you have to be more sensitive about your tax planning.
So you're going to need tariffs to maintain this.
No, there's no tariffs between the counties.
No, you're talking about a national employment tax, right? If we're going to say that there's free movement of labor and various different jurisdictions have different tax rates, then you've got a competition, but you need a 7% increase in labor taxes.
No, it goes to 7%. So it's already 6.2%. Okay. We're talking about like a less than 1% increase, right? I mean, this is not a calamitous thing that you guys are describing.
So real quick, do you believe in free trade?
Yeah.
Okay, so then everyone goes to Mexico.
No, free trade.
Dude, we increase the payroll tax by 2%. Everyone's going to Mexico. Everyone's going to Mexico. Can't tax people. They're going to Mexico. Then why we need tariffs to fund the welfare? Like, are you fucking kidding me, Tim?
It is not the same thing as people can easily shift their entire domestic production base and their entire labor base.
Don't say it would be easy, but why wouldn't they? If you're talking about a company that generates, say, $10 billion per year.
Why would a company not offshore? Like, no, this is not. First of all, almost no company's decision of whether or not to offshore is going to be influenced by like a 2% increase in a payroll tax. But second of all, I don't like the reason people are still pay for U.S. labor is because our labor is higher productivity, because our labor is high skill. It's things that you can really only get like in the U.S. like
revenue, and they're looking at 0.75%.
Our high wages are compensated for by high productivity, and other countries' low wages are compensated for, or rather, other countries' low productivity is compensated for by their low wages. Like,
they will spend that money and go to Mexico. We've seen it happen for 30 years.
Well, no. So
we didn't happen. We don't ignore all the data. That's another way. No. So there's a very good reasons to believe that trade is not the primary driver of the. How many times have you guys heard me say this? Of the decline in manufacturing employment. If you look at manufacturing output, it's been going up for the past 30 years until the 2008 financial crisis, when sort of structural reasons decreased manufacturing productivity growth, and decrease investment in that sector as well. And but it just seems like manufacturing output was growing all the way from like 1980, 1990, from 1960 to 2008, and also a trend line from 1960 to 1980 of manufacturing employment. If you extrapolate that trend line out, it almost exactly predicts the manufacturing share of employment now, which is indicative of the fact that it just wasn't trade, because that trend line has no knowledge of the from 1960 to 1980, no knowledge of NAFTA, no knowledge of China joining the WTO. You guys have heard me say this 100 times. It's fucking stupid. Temple, invite me on our show. Let me debate you on trade being responsible for the decline in the manufacturing share of employment. And also, like, it seems like, for the most part, there's a Cato Institute article about this, which I have to take better notes on. Everyone from Mexico is flooding into the U.S. because it's so much better. But however, the 2% payroll tax is increased by 2%. This will reverse. This is true, actually. It's also fun. Free trade and immigration. I've mentioned it before. Free trade and immigrations are substitutes, not perfect substitutes, but substitutes nonetheless. You would think conservatives would at least be in support of one of them, but I don't know. Leftists said Americans would be moving to Mexico once Scheinbaum elected. I don't know how to pronounce her name, so I thought. So I think it might take 3%. So that it happened. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. Mexico will have an illegal immigration problem from the U.S. True.
What you're talking about is much more on the margin. Right now, we have a service-based economy, a consumption-based economy, right? So even if like a lot of manufacturing and stuff, we've already seen this happen. A lot of manufacturing goes overseas. It's not as if we've seen GDP go down. We haven't seen recession after recession because.
This is just. The whole reason trade is beneficial is because it lets you specialize in things that you're better in. Lets you specialize in things that you are higher productive. It's not the whole reason. There are other reasons like economies from scale. Which, guys, guess what? By the way, manufacturing companies benefit from economies of scale. They benefit from being able to export all their goods to other markets, and tariffs reduce their ability to do that because of exchange rate appreciation, because of retaliatory tariffs, and because of tariffs on their intermediate goods and inputs. Anyway, it lets you specialize in things that you're higher productivity in, and all the empirical evidence says that trade increases wages, trade increases total income, trade increases GDP growth, which makes a lot of sense because trade seems to increase, mechanistically trade increases productivity. It just lets you get the same amount of things with less resources, which is actually, guess what? More conducive to funding a welfare state, being richer, It's better to fund a welfare state than being poorer. Trade makes you richer.
Because of the manufacturing
Let
decline.
me ask you some questions real quick.
Yep, go for it.
You said we're a service-based and consumer-based economy.
Sure.
How is that funded? Like, what do we produce that generates the products to be consumed?
This is the dumbest shit ever. First of all, again, manufacturing output has been increasing. It's been, Fred, real manufacturing output. Fred, real manufacturing. Where's value add? All right, real value added. Manufacturing. Dimple, look, Dimple, look, Dimple, look. Oh my god, hold on. Fuck, 10 years. Has been flat over 10 years. Since 2008, it's been flat, like I said. Oh, look, it's been increasing. Basically flat since 2008. But yeah, if you want to discuss the fucking structural reasons behind that happening, read fucking Robert Z. Lawrence. Real value added. Oh, it's still going up. It's still going up. It's still going up. We're still producing more. And just look up U.S. exports, by the way. This is going to be a little more relevant in a second.
What do you mean? What do we produce?
Well, if we're not a manufacturing economy, what?
We produce services. Every fucking computer in the world runs on, Microsoft computers, and our banks are some of the biggest banks that a bunch of international companies use. And like,
Are we consuming?
Oh, well, we're consuming a lot. Well, a whole bunch of different shit, Tim. We're housing and food,
We don't
electronics.
consume a house. Houses are hard assets.
Well, houses are an asset, but also there's
that's so like, Econoboi explains it. You do housing is both an asset and a consumption. That's actually why housing is hard to measure in CPI, because it's both like you're consuming your house and it's an asset at the same time. That's actually why we have owner's equivalent rent, because we try to account for that fact. We try to treat housing as if it was consumed with owner's equivalent rent. But a less than 1% increase in payroll taxes will not only cause capital flight, but also labor migration. Exactly.
depreciation to a house, because as you consume the house, quote unquote, right, it goes down in value.
Like lumber and aluminum and these materials.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's when I say you consume a house, I don't mean in some literal sense.
So we'll try this again. So we're talking about houses, and you say there's a depreciation. Houses need to be repaired. Someone's got to be hired to do that. This requires materials like steel.
Sure.
Okay. Well, we don't manufacture that. We're importing it.
First of all, I mean, I think Cato's thing goes in this. Even steel, I think actually output has technically increased. And steel tariffs, it did not even seem to fucking help steel production that much. Where's a graph? Give me a graph or a table or something. Fuck you, Cato. Jones Act. But regardless, yeah, we don't produce steel. Great job noticing, Tim Pool.
Okay.
Because we specialize in higher productivity things. Because everyone working in a steel plant could have otherwise been someone working for Apple designing iPhones. And guess what? The cheaper steel lets companies produce more shit because all their inputs are cheaper. It lets us build more homes because homes need steel, and it being cheaper lets companies build more shit, and that means consumers save more money, which means consumers can spend more on other things like services, which are higher productivity, which means it's just so many unseen benefits.
So what are we giving to these foreign countries so that they give us steel in return?
We're giving them dollars.
And what do they do with the dollars?
Well, they either invest it in U.S. securities, U.S. assets. I mean, they do something with it, obviously, that you would normally do with U.S. dollars.
So let's bring this down to the root of
The impact I hope I make in this world. It's just that sentence that Econoboi just said. Okay, it's just understanding the balance of payments. Have you ever seen Steve Keen debunking comparative advantage? I feel like Cope's okay, or maybe Sam told me about that once, but I don't know. There were so many like potential benefits from trade. That's like even if comparative advantage like doesn't hold true all the time. Like there are still benefits from economies of scale. There are still just benefits from exchange. Dude, I tweeted out. There's like that clip of like Howard Lutnick saying like, "We design iPhones. Why can't we make iPhones here?" And it's like, duh, oh what, dude, we export high skill things and import low skill things. Dude, what? Dude, no economist has ever considered this. But wait, what? What? Dude, that's fucking crazy, dude. They do the dude. No one's ever talked about the fucking smile curve, dude. What do you, dude? What the fuck did I just look up? What what the value chain and what? What? Concept of research and development? You're telling me we do the research and development and we do like the branding, we might do design a little bit, and then there's other countries that do the lower value shit, like
the phrase economia, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right?
No.
It's the root of economy, which means household management.
Okay.
If you live in a house where you don't produce
hold on, what the fuck is this shit? Smyokir.
anything, and you have a universal trade a currency for your house. I know you don't, but let's just say for your house, you're like, hey, if I give you this currency, you can come to me and buy stuff, but you don't make anything in that house. Repairs are needed. So you go to someone and say, I don't make anything, but I need steel for my house. I'll give to you, Mr. Chinese national who makes steel. You give him currency for your house. What he buys from you is going to be the rights and control of your house, your land, your properties, because you don't make anything to exchange. This is actually what we've been seeing in the United States with China.
I mean, this is like the most retarded way of understanding what a capital account surplus is. It's like, he is right. China will either buy a U.S. good, or they will buy a U.S. asset, which, yes, that creates a corresponding liability, but like having liabilities on its own is not bad. Like, that's not like that. Again, it's a mutual benefit thing. Like, companies receive investment whilst also, having a liability to their like shareholders or whatever. The U.S. receives, money to borrow with. It receives money to spend, by China buying bonds. And that, yes, obviously creates a liability in that the U.S. government now has to pay out money to that bond. Now, I will mention, part of what's nice about, we have a lot of privilege in that where the world reserve currency, which means we can't really experience a balance of payments crisis. And, we print our own currency as well, which means we have more, I'm not going to go full MMT on you, but we kind of have more wiggle room when it comes to not having to worry about defaulting,
China buying up large swaths of farmland. We go to China and we give them US dollars in exchange for their labor. We then bring those products from China, and it's not just China, but largely China. They then give us, these are not just hard products, but also the resources need to make other products in the United States. So famously, like bicycles, for instance, they'll say assembled in the USA, but the metal's actually produced and manufactured in China and shipped here. So you think you're buying an American product, but you're not. China then takes those US.
Tim Pool, Mr. Ban All Imports wants to, wants the entire value chain to be in the U.S. apparently. Jesus, like, you think you're buying an American product, but have you considered the inputs for the product are made overseas? It's like, okay, do we think that it might be beneficial for U.S. producers to have access to cheap inputs? Do we think that might be beneficial for them? Do we think that supply may shift to the right? Dude, I'm $1 million in debt. I'm fucking being America selling out to China right now. I have to start a new...
US dollars and says, hey, America is not producing anything. They're a service-based consumer economy. So what can we buy from them? Their labor in exchange. Hold on. Our labor is cheaper than American labor. We don't need that. So what do we do with these US dollars? What we see...
Again, countries' low productivity is compensated for by low wages, and countries' high productivity is compensated for by high wages. So yes, our wages are really high, but there's a lot of places that still need our labor, because guess what? We do a lot of high skill, high productivity things that you just can't find in a lot of these developing countries. Like, look at a lot of our exports. Vaccines, blood. I mean, other countries could probably do blood, but like vaccines are like a very capital intensive thing. Medical instruments is very hard for a lot of people to do, a lot of countries to do. Planes, helicopters, spacecraft. These are our exports. These are things that are very high, a lot of things that are high skill. Also, that's also where so much of retarded economics comes from. Even the Gary's economic acting like ultra rich, owning your mortgages somehow only helps them. As though you can't now live in a house you would it would have never been able to afford otherwise. Yeah, I know. It's just like, so guys, it's positive some games exist, okay? Even if there are like even if there are like negatives of things, it's just like sometimes the positives can just outweigh the negatives. It could be, I know, zero sum thinking. It's just like,
over the past 30 years, they've been buying up large swaths of our land and housing. They then rent it.
That's also just like not like I think 1% of U.S. land is owned by China would be like a stupid thing because we have so much land. But like, first of all, the land is still here. Like there's not really like what worst case scenario, nationalize it. Okay, like what unless they're gonna like invade for the land that they like own back, like what the fuck are they gonna like? There's no big national security threat or anything. I understand like strategic goods, batteries being made in China is bad because if we go to war with China or something, they can cut off our battery supply. If we go to war with China, it's not like the land that they own is impossible to just nationalize. we'll just nationalize it and find a domestic buyer. Like that's not a big national security concern. Same thing with Japan owning steel mills in the U.S. Like the steel production is fucking here. And then it just does not seem like something that's happening that much. Like what percent of U.S. homes owned by China? Like I don't even know. Like it's probably like 2,000 homes in the U.S. or something. Chinese buyers accounted for 11% of all foreign buyers, but it was foreign buyers. Foreign buyers is probably 1% of fucking eminent domain. Yeah, exactly. Foreign buyers is probably like 1% of the U.S. home market, and like China's 11% of that. Like
back to our own citizens. If you do not produce something but promise labor or value in exchange for a resource, the only thing you have to sell is the clothes off your back, and that's what this country's been doing for 34.
It's just not true. It's just not true. We sell a lot of things to the world. We sell all the exports I just mentioned, planes and fucking medical devices and services. We export a lot of services. We export banking and insurance, which I don't know, maybe Tim Pool thinks that's not real, but yeah, and those are things that we're good at. Those are things that are, typically more capital intensive, and we are very rich in capital relative to other countries. And it makes sense we would export those things.
4 years.
Well, Tim, part of a service economy is the idea that like you're like a construction services, for instance. Like
Zero-sum thinking, the roots of U.S. political difference. Ooh, that's probably fucking goes hard. We investigated origins and implications of zero-sum thinking. The belief that gains for one individual group tend to come at the cost of others. Using a new survey of 20,400 U.S. residents, we measure zero-sum thinking, political preferences, policy views, and a rich array of ancestral information spanning 4 generations. We find that more zero-sum mindset is strongly associated with more support for government redistribution, race and gender-based affirmative action, and more restrictive immigration policies. Zero-sum thinking can be traced back to the experiences of both individuals and their ancestors, encompassing factors such as degree of intergenerational upward mobility they experienced, whether they immigrated to the U.S. or lived in a location with more immigrants, and whether they were enslaved or lived in a location with more enslavement. What the fuck? Do you mean whether their ancestors were enslaved? When was this paper? Wait, what? Huh.
Like we still produce a lot of housing in this country.
China doesn't need to buy services from us. Their labor is cheaper than ours.
Well, Tim,
China buys plenty of services from us. It's not, again, it may like there's very I don't know how to get through these people. Like I can do we want to just go to the Wikipedia page of I always say HOS model because that's how I heard it first described to me, but it's just HOS is like a variation of it. There are at the very least there are plausible models where it would be mutually beneficial for us to export or for us to import goods and to export services to China. Like just because China can make shoes cheaper doesn't mean they can make everything cheaper. I know, and it's again, it's I think the What's Wrong with Protectionism book has a pretty good way of explaining this shit. Trade econ. What's wrong with protectionism? Oh, also the imports are benefit, exports are cost. That's something you can kind of bring up because you can kind of intuitively explain to people why that can make sense. Do I have it highlighted? I don't know if I have it highlighted. I thought I had something highlighted in here, but oh, it might be in the second chapter. No, fuck. Domestic resources are previously used in explaining deadweight loss. Still could be used to produce other goods or reallocated to produce domestically an additional quantity to produce the good. This is because the higher price domestic producers can get incites them to spend more and increase the quantity they supply. This increased domestic output is a waste and produces deadweight loss because the good in question could be and was before imported at a better price, while domestic resources were able to produce something else. Another component of deadweight loss is what consumers lose because they decrease the quantity they demand, their total consumption of the protected good because the price has increased in the domestic market. The deadweight loss is straight waste that benefits no one. I don't know how to spell remuneration. Does Tim think he's a factory worker? It is funny. I think the the Project Liberal has like an image of Tim Pool that's like free trade. It sucks for America. Starting pack. Microphone made in Switzerland. Microphone stand made in China. Hat made in Indonesia. Tim Pool funded by Russia. Like. I don't know how to, or I don't. I don't know, but it's explain. It's just compensated. Alternative way to grasp comparative advantage is to understand a poor country's low productivity. It is precisely because productivity is low, is more than compensated for by its low wages. And on the other side of trade, a rich country's high wages are more than compensated for by its high productivity. But this offsetting only holds true for the goods in which each country has a comparative advantage. Otherwise, the compensation does not happen. For instance, Bangladesh's low wages do not compensate for its low productivity in machinery production, and America's high productivity in clothing does not compensate for its high wages. What about the HOS model? Assume that labor is the only factor in production that matters, and that all workers are the same. I don't think the HOS model assumes that, right? In fact, I think that I remember the thing I tweeted out has the because I think technically the HO model like doesn't hold very well in the real world. That's why Krugman had to come along with new trade theory. Okay. Because most countries that trade actually don't really have that different factor endowments. They are pretty similar, but each avocado I buy is a betrayal of the domestic industry, and yes, it hurts. I know. But what was I saying? But there is a like what I tweeted out. Like it's if you split labor into high skilled labor and unskilled labor, it does seem like countries that are relatively more abundant in skilled labor tend to export skilled labor, and countries that are relatively more abundant in unskilled labor tend to specialize in and export unskilled labor, and it's still mutually beneficial and good and based in awesome sauce.
That's just the trade intensity of the economy. You still have this entire domestic economy that's based on not just service.
We are 36 minutes in, and I've been recording for 1 hour, and I think I started recording a little bit after the video started even.
But also you're still producing something.
So let's go back to the main point I said. If the resources we need for those services to exist are produced by foreign countries for which we give them money. They don't need to buy our service from us because their labor is cheaper. What will they buy? We don't produce raw materials for the most part, so they're not going to buy from us. They don't need our service.
Wait, this is a complete misnomer. The United States produces a lot of raw materials. Right?
Indeed, it does.
We do make a lot of intermediate goods and capital goods and things like that, right?
But we are a service and consumer economy, meaning the majority of what we're trading between ourselves is the services, not the raw materials. Steel plants have been closing across this country quite a bit. We call the Pittsburgh Steelers Steelers because they made steel there. They don't make steel there anymore.
Well, Tim, circle this back to the welfare state. We've gone a little bit far flung here.
The point is this.
Yeah, what's the point?
The value of the economy is being extracted, and we're not going to be able
Kill me.
to maintain a welfare state when our assets are being bought off our backs because we don't produce anything anymore.
Well, no. Okay.
Oh, fuck, why did I don't want to... what did I click on? Okay, oh, yeah, like, everything he said is unbelievably stupid. But again, even if I accepted the premise, which obviously I don't, I think that free trade makes us richer, and therefore, it, makes us richer, more productive, and that actually increases our ability to fund a welfare state. But even if I accepted this premise, there'd still be a case to be made for the welfare state in that whatever income we have, it would be, you know, it can still be beneficial to distribute that income, redistribute that income to people who wouldn't get it from market systems. No, I'm saying that you use the HOS model, but then assume that the only differences in factors of production is the cost of labor between unskilled and unskilled labor. Then you might get something like Tim's understanding of trade. Oh, okay. Based on his view of labor value, wouldn't he be basically worthless? He's professionally wrong. Professionally wrong on the internet, as far as I can tell. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's not producing anything. He's just he's providing a service, which is for me to leech off of him.
I get the misunderstanding now. So no, just because you trade, that doesn't mean that value is being extracted from your economy. Obviously, when people buy things from other countries, they're assuming that there's some value added to buying those products, right? So they might sell raw materials, but we use those materials to whatever. Like we ship lumber in from Canada, we use that to build a house, right? So
what can China buy from us if their labor is cheaper than ours and they're producing largely our raw materials?
Well, you can look up what China buys from the United
They're
States.
buying our land.
Well, they don't just buy land, obviously.
Yes, but
like I said, we export fucking soybeans to them. Bunch of other shit.
They're a lot of intermediate goods.
Why do I extend so much? I have said enough about trade for the time being.
They buy services from us,
corporate
right?
securities, control of our corporate systems, our land.
Control of our corporate system. Like, dog. Like, yeah. I understand. There are liabilities, but it's still positive sum. It's still positive sum.
Assets. If you don't produce things to trade, which we are producing, which we are not producing to keep up with the consumer economy.
I really wonder where he got this from, because there's no, like, Jim Poole did not think of this shit himself. I'm really curious what guy explained to him a capital account surplus in these terms. Like,
you will end up with them buying your hard assets from you.
Okay, so if you'll indulge me,
yeah, sure.
Econoboi. So I think that this is, even if you think that it's all going to be okay, it's all going to come out in the wash, et cetera, there is an underlying anxiety of the American economy, which is what is the American economy actually backed by? Now, this is a mistake that I actually think Trump makes, so, you know, throwing a little shade to the right, is that the main thing that we do is services, and we also do defense. We are the American, you know, we are, for better or worse, the world police.
Quick
so when
side
I
note,
see,
Trump did brag famously that we were selling weapons to Saudi Arabia in exchange for lots of money, good for our economy.
Based. So anyways, but the point is, so this is actually where I get frustrated with the Trump admin, though, because they're effectively saying, we don't need soft power, why do we need to be involved in East Africa? We don't need soft power, why are we involved in West Africa, Asia, whatever.
Because
so,
we're talking about the welfare state here.
We will move back to it. I just want to make this point because I think it's important.
Just fair point. That is a great point. We do manufacture weapons, and the best of them.
Right. So the point is that everybody wants to be our friend because we manufacture the best weapons and we know how to deploy them.
It's on both sides.
So what I would, well, sometimes. But so we can move back to the welfare. I have no problems moving back to welfare, but I want to make this point, is that the underlying anxiety of the American conservative.
Orin Cass. What about Orin Cass?
I think, even if they're not able to articulate
my favorite fucking sellout, dude. That guy fucking.
We're selling tax software to the international economy. That's actually something.
Oh, Orin Cass, you're saying maybe gave him that understanding of the capital account surplus that way. Is Orin Cass that? I don't even know if Orin Cass is that bad. I don't even know if he's that bad. I'm not saying it. Listen, and he's pretty bad. He's pretty fucking bad. Like.
Mother does, but realistically, eventually those economies are gonna complexify to the point that they can produce their own domestic software, and they're not gonna need American software in order to do it. This is to the tunes of billions of dollars, by the way.
Well, Connor,
sorry, guys, listen. I listened to you for 10 minutes. I want to make a whole point. Okay, I know I'm a very verbose person, but I've also been very patient. So the other thing, though, that backs the American economy is defense. And so the reason why I get frustrated with the Trump admin is
why is Orin Cass bad? He just So first of all, I can't tell how much of what Orin Cass says he actually believes, because a lot of it is stupid, and from what I know, he did not used to have such stupid beliefs. What does he actually say? A bunch of dumb shit about trade, basically. A bunch of dumb shit about manufacturing, employment, and trade. Probably some dumb shit. I think he probably does say dumb shit about the balance of payments and capital account surplus and things like that. Bunch of dumb things about the effects of tariffs. Like, yeah. But it's hard, again, it's hard to even know how much he actually believes. But what was I saying? I was gonna say fuck me.
In my opinion, you see Marco Rubio in a meeting, it looks like he wants to eat a gun. I think the reason why he wants to eat a gun is because America is giving away its soft power. And then also in our hard power, the MAGA movement is not interested in flexing international soft power. And so I look at the American economy, which is primarily like digital services and the defense industry. And if we're not selling our hard power, and if digital services will be replaced by domestic competitors eventually, what the hell is the American economy backed by? And I worry about that for the future of the next American century.
Just real quick to pull it all back, just to connect this, the reason that this came up is because how do we fund a welfare state is the question. And the economy is in the state.
Yeah, and I can answer. So I think we hear a lot more talk like this in small countries, right? So small countries will phrase it like, well, we need to learn how to climb the value chain. We need to climb the value chain, right? And so what they're essentially saying is kind of similar to what you guys are saying is like we need to find ways to be able to export goods that people want to buy because we want to get foreign currency reserves and we want to invest in foreign capital, things like that, right? We need to be able to import the things that we need for machines, right? And so if you wanted to talk about, hey, we need a coherent strategy for the United States to innovate, to climb the value chain, to produce things that people need, I don't know who would really disagree with that. Again, that has nothing to do, that's just a completely separate conversation from the welfare state. Now, if you wanted to make the case that, oh, well, the welfare state is limiting our ability to produce technology, that would be a very difficult argument to make.
So I think what Tim and I are kind of poking at, maybe not masterfully, but we're poking at it, is that in order to have enough wealth, resources, money, time, energy, in order to create the welfare state, you need to actually have goods and services produced that you're selling to people who are interested in purchasing them. Another thing that I forgot a moment ago in order to say that it seems like our economy is backed by is being the world reserve currency and also being heavily invested in the security of the international energy industry, effectively oil and petroleum. And so the thing is, if we...
I really don't think being a world reserve currency is like that. First of all, I'm not convinced one way or the other if being the world reserve currency is actually beneficial or net negative. I would lean towards it being beneficial, but I'm not actually convinced that it is. I think Brian guy has I think he has 2 articles about it by now, actually. I think it's this and this. Is dollar dominance good for the U.S.? And should we worry about global imbalances? Which is actually both published by someone who's not Brian, but on Brian's Substack on economic forces. But I'm not actually convinced that it is net beneficial. And even if it is net beneficial, I'm not convinced it's what the U.S. economy is backed on.
we see people drifting away from us, for instance, Iran with Russia and China, then let's say that Saudi Arabia, BRICS, all that kind of stuff, they're moving away from our currency. And this is, again, where I get frustrated with the current administration, is that it seems like we're hurting ourselves, and potentially these precarious things on which the entire American commercial empire is built is kind of like the floor is being pulled out underneath us. Now, if we want to move back to welfare to just like, how do we create this kind of thing? And we just want to say, we are going to make enough money that we can tax in order to create a welfare state. What does that look like? We can do that.
Small point.
But I'm just saying, this is the underlying anxiety.
Well, but I don't think the anxiety is totally relevant. So for instance, there's only one country where we have, a global reserve currency, right? It's America. America has, the global reserve currency, right? Now, obviously, a lot of other currencies are held in reserve. America just dominates that, essentially. Mm-hmm. Now, when we look at all these other countries that are not the global reserve currency, Australia, Norway, the UK, New Zealand, they have huge welfare states, right? They have bigger welfare states, more expansive welfare states than America does, right? And so when we try to link these two arguments and say, oh, well, if we don't have the global reserve currency and if we have even more massive deindustrialization, that's going to cause us to not be able to have, some adequate level of welfare state. Why don't we see that in all these other countries?
This is where I get pissed at MAGA. I'm sorry. This is where I get pissed at MAGA. Is the reason why all those countries that you just listed, I think, are comfortable with the United States as the global reserve currency is because our involvement in the energy industry internationally, our involvement in security internationally, and they look to us as the world leader. So that's where I get pissed at the current administration, because it feels like they want to give away our position. And then I think that eventually, if it got bad enough, there would be these orbiters, orbiting nations that would say, why are we deferring to the United States? They're psychotic and they're giving up their power and they're screwing us over. And so that's another one of my
we pay for a lot of security of a lot of countries around the world.
Well, but sure. Tim, even that, like, people make that argument, oh, their welfare states are subsidized by our military expenditure. Look, how much money do we spend on the military? We spend about
5% GDP.
All right, we spend about $1 trillion a year in terms of like total defense consumption, right? That doesn't.
They're mostly at like 2 or 1.5.
Right. And so we spend about exactly, Connor. So we spend about 3.5% of GDP on our defense industry, and obviously that includes all the international security that we provide. If we were to ask all these countries, like we've got like countries like Iceland and Norway and like Australia that are spending 45% of GDP on all their different government programs, right? Which includes their own militaries, obviously. If we were to say, oh yeah, if you tick that up to 46.5%. What, is Australia going to completely collapse?
Hey, it's over for them.
No,
it's over.
You agree with that, Connor?
Okay, I agree with that. But then the question is, what does their 3% look like versus our 3%? Because our economy is so large, 3.5% looks like, I don't know, F-35s. It looks like special forces who have every techno-gizmo. 3.5% of the Australian economy, sorry Australians, it looks like trucks. You know what I'm saying?
We still have cooperation between defense.
Of course. But all you're doing, sorry, real quick, all you're doing is you're showing me why I'm pissed off at Trump. That's all you're saying.
I just want to ask a question. There is a point at which you tax people too much and the system collapses, yes?
True, Temple, yes, Laffer curve, yes, I love it, yes, like, oh my god. Please, can we talk about distributing income to people? Please, can we talk about reducing poverty? Yes. Guess what? If you did a 5 quadrillion % tax, people would leave the U.S. and things would go to shit. But guess what? You don't need to do that. All you need to do, you just need just socializing resource rents and giving them to poor people is good enough. Like dog.
eventually collapse? The answer is yes, because we've seen it dozens of times throughout history, Venezuela being a recent
Well,
example.
it depends on, obviously, how you're socializing things and also what kind of taxes that you're using. Now, if you wanted to say, hey, the United States doesn't have an optimal tax code, I would agree, right? On my Substack, I released The Left Needs Better Tax Policy article series where I talk to this fact. And but even if we were to look at suboptimal tax codes, right? Look at, like the Nordic countries, all the 5 different Nordic countries, right? They have things like payroll taxes and income taxes and wealth taxes and inheritance taxes and income taxes, right? These are forms of taxation that are not necessarily optimal. And they're forms of taxation that they have that are way higher than our current levels of taxation. The last thing that I'll say, Connor, is that, again, we don't see this sort of deleterious collapse of those economies. They actually have higher GDP per hour work than we do.
Right. But this gets into something that we brought up earlier, which is immigration and integration. So I think that what's effectively happened over the past century without an explanation to the American people or the developed.
Yes, tell me, no welfare because it's a homogenous society. Yes, please, Connor, yes.
World is that we saw birth rates all trend towards 2 per 100,000, and effectively, even if you look at West Africa, East Africa, all that kind of stuff, they might be at 4 right now. They're trending towards 2, right? And then a lot of developed countries, yeah, exactly. The current, I think we're at 1.66 as a nation, which includes Hispanic.
Those economies also haven't been growing like the. Well, that is true, Bob Marley. That is true. That is fair. That is fair. But I also just don't listen, and I'm not. I love Econoboi. I'm not going to say I want to socialize 67% of GDP like he does, okay? I think that probably would have some negative impacts on growth. But I'm not convinced that most welfare is that negative on growth, but...
Who have a higher birth rate than the North European.
Damn, we already talked to the real Bob
so
Marley.
This gets into immigration and integration. You say, well, we can use
Kind of
immigration
really
as an
doesn't
economic
to read
stopgap
these, but
in order to
I'll DM
offset some
to
of these
him
costs
later,
that we're
maybe.
gonna, these challenges that we have with the welfare state. But then what I'm going to say as
What if there are negative externalities to wealth in the normal return to capitalist theft? Do we need a wealth tax? Econoboi probably would actually, I mean... he does value equality, and he probably would argue that there are quite a few negative outcomes for due to equality. Are you not allowed to disagree with the doughy pale guy? I have argued with Econoboi plenty of times. I'm just the thing he's going. We are united in our goal for the welfare state, and he's going in front of a big audience and fighting for the welfare state, and I want to be supportive of him. That is the philosophy there.
I know that not a lot of people in chat believe me, but I do have conservative tendencies. As a conservative, I'm going to say that integration, if you're going to have immigration, integration has to be a core component of that. We need to have a national...
I would have to... I would have to hear basically Econoboi and sample text fight it out, I think. Sometimes I just feel like in order to have an opinion on something, I just need to have people I know debate it. That's my feelings on things. It's I know people who are both smart who have different opinions, and I just need to see them fight it out to understand where I agree with it. Inheritance tax is a thing for a reason. I do think inherited wealth is probably pretty bad.
Message. What does it mean to be American? What do we believe in? What are our principles? And we also have to force people to integrate into that because, as an example, our labor force participation rate hovers around 60% right now, which, by the way, decreased substantively since the 2008 market collapse because I think people stopped believing in the economy as much.
You kind of
when
need to get
you
an
look at
argument
the
aside
Scandinavian countries, as an example, I know I'm picking the high example, but I'm going to be a dick about it. Sweden is at 70%. There's literally a 10% difference.
Oh, in terms of labor force participation?
Labor force participation.
Well, but that's kind of my point, though, right? So I want to make a couple of points, right?
Sorry, real quick. This is a directed question.
Okay.
How do you bump labor force participation rate by 10%?
So you've kind of fallen into one of my points, right? So that's what I was going to say.
He's a Nobel Prize winning economist, you and me, who has a lot of really cool papers about a lot of it's about have you heard of the book Why Nations Fail? A lot of it's about developmental economics and institutions and
If we look at those societies that have much more generous welfare benefits, they have higher labor force participation, both in general and also prime age, and they also have higher employment rates, right? So just generally more people going to work. Now, it's fair to say that if you have a generous welfare state, it's not going to cause people to just, all of them are just going to collapse out of the job force because we're going to get on these generous benefits. That doesn't happen in the countries that have very generous benefits. So to your question,
I would argue that that's because of culture.
Well, no. So to your question,
you're going to have to address that specifically. I would argue that they have an industrious culture, and you said no. Why?
No. So I think that for the most part, obviously, I'm sure culture has an effect on the margin, right? But the big things, right? So why has labor force changed over time? Look at America, right? America, in terms of prime age labor force participation, right? So people between 25 and 54, the people who really should be working.
He doesn't just have really cool papers. He has at least one cool paper in every topic. Very true.
To be healthy. That's at record levels in America. Record levels. The reason why
record high, I'm assuming you're saying.
Well, record high, yeah. Okay. I don't know the difference. But
well, record low would be the opposite. So I would be worried if you were
no, record levels. I don't know if this might be a little bit weird, the audio here, but
sorry, real quick. There is a story though that did come out recently. I would obviously have to look at the statistical data rather than just a random editorial. But there was something saying that effectively, the next generation, I guess it's alpha, as they're coming into the workforce, there's 25%, like not in education, employment, or training?
Well, so Gen Z is 50 split
Me for real.
right now with the
I am in education, and exclamation point TGS on the chat. Technically, I am providing very valuable services if you think about it. So,
oldest Gen Z around 26, 27 years old,
Yeah.
and then the youngest I think are early teens.
Yeah.
So the mid of Gen Z is supposed to be entering the workforce right now, but we're
Okay.
seeing a lot of, they're called NEETs,
Yep.
not in education. What is it?
Employment or training.
Right, there you go.
And so, listen. For the sake of the argument, I'll track you wherever you're going. But that news story is an alarm bell, because I would make that almost an exclusively cultural argument.
Real quick, the reason why I asked about the point at which if you tax people too much, the system breaks, is that we are going to have in 10 years 58 million boomers projected, 70-ish million millennials. I know millennials aren't dying of old age, but there's general mortality. It's kind of sad. And Gen Z will be around 68 million. So we're going to need a labor force to support, in 10 years, the boomers on Social Security, 50 million. But there's only going to be 40 some odd million.
and they already addressed Social Security, but again, we should have just said privatize Social Security. Define utility. It's a really hard thing to define. Total, like positive qualia. Like, I don't know what to. He has a lot of really cool papers, but he started. Oh fuck! What did I click on? But starting a persistent studies meme was kind of cool. Based.
Gen Alpha
He follows your professor on Twitter. Holy based.
begin entering that workforce. The solution then for that issue is going to be we're going to have to tax people more.
Or immigration.
Indeed.
Or immigration,
But immigration doesn't solve the
Immigration, productivity growth, and yes, taxes. But taxes are just based sometimes.
the problem. It does band-aid some of it. The issue with mass migration, as we've seen from the Democratic Party, which is largely unskilled labor.
This is definitely what he was saying, by the way, was when he said immigration would help alleviate the problem was mass migration.
Is that labor force of a country is going to be divided by a wave of from high skill down to low skill. You can't just flood the low skill bracket and leave the mid to high skills.
Which is why I argue about integration, which is I think that these are largely, listen, Econoboi,
But it's not integration. You can have a Chinatown where they only speak Chinese if they're producing things to trade with other people. The issue is normally the way the labor force expands is that a new generation enters the low skill portion of the workforce and then gains those skills over time. And then some people jump to the high point. Some people are geniuses. Some people are dumb. But if you flood 20 million non-skilled labor, you're going to keep seeing a collapse of the mid-range
Also,
and the high range.
Nice 20 million number, bro. He oh my God, I can't believe that fucking number caught on, dude. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, it's so obviously not true.
And all of the higher level functions are going to be strained and collapse, and you can't have everyone fighting over the same jobs in the low.
Econoboi, if you'll indulge me.
Keep
And so-
circling
and
back
so
to
when I say-
this generation issue as a means to justify a COVID sequel to take out the boomers. Based.
integration, I don't
That's the
specifically
real
mean
thing we need.
Asians in Chinatown need to speak English, right? What I mean is that they need to go to, well, not the Asians in particular, right? Let's be real.
Go to school a lot.
Yeah, like 80% of, we're talking about Hispanics. 80% of immigration into the United States is going to be Hispanics, right? So what I'm talking about with integration is we need to look at school, and I hate that conservatives are retreating from school. We need to look at that as a socialization apparatus in order to prepare the next generation for the workforce. And we have looked at it that way for a very long time. My frustration with MAGA and some of the like walking away from education movements and the gutting of the DOE, we don't have to get into details. But the reason why I get frustrated with that is because effectively what you're saying is every man for himself. And so we have people who are going to be homeschooled. We have people who are going to go to private school. They might do well individually, but when we're talking about on a culture-wide basis, if we're decreasing the quality of education, then effectively what we're not doing is we're not socializing that next generation, and we're making it more difficult. You're saying that flooding the bottom tier. I would want the bottom tier within 2 or 3 generations to be climbing to the higher echelons. Why not? I'm Irish. I'm a mud-dwelling, bog-dwelling, rock-dwelling.
Unbeliever fallacy, but
generations
also
of
with the low skill. Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, low skill jobs would drain on the high skill one somehow. Yeah, that doesn't make sense either. But yeah, I think I might go on a immigration arc, by the way, because I wanna. Do I want to spoil what I'm doing? Do I want to spoil what I'm doing? I'll spoil what I'm doing. Doesn't matter. I kind of want to. I don't know for sure. I'm not committing to this yet. That Jake Rattlesnake dude who like debated Silly Pill on like gender roles and sometimes on the Sarah the Raging Tomato panels. I looked at his channel a little bit ago. I saw he has like really dumb videos on tariffs and immigration, and it's like no data, just pure like lump of labor fallacy. He says the tariffs are actually reciprocal and like calculated based on a smart formula. It's like okay, duh. It's like okay. It's like, we're just tariffing them as much as they're tariffing us. It's like, this guy knows nothing. And it's like, I don't know. I might want to make a just short scripted video just being like, hey, this guy's just dumb. He's just stupid.
been here.
3 or 4.
3 or 4 generations of social development. You can't take people who grew up on farms and ask them to go code.
We need a matrix so we can stuff surplus population in there and keep them in status.
Sure, but that's what I'm talking about, a 3 or 4 generational project.
Well,
A nation building over 100 years.
Yeah.
well, obviously,
We're going to have an immediate problem that immigration won't solve.
Sure.
Well, obviously, immigration has its own issues, right? So you do have to have a sort of methodical and thoughtful immigration process. But again, these are all separate conversations, right? So, the
I don't
welfare,
think so, bud.
welfare
You keep saying
state.
that, but I don't think they are.
Okay, so do you
You
agree?
cannot advocate for mass spending on welfare while ignoring the collapsing labor force, the fluctuation in the tax base, and the wealth resources.
Well,
the welfare
Econoboi,
state.
you say increase the taxes
let me
because we
butt
can
in
make up for
here.
the wealth. Well, hold on, real quick.
Because
You said that
you held
It's like Econoboi has talked like 20% of this time. It's like
up real quick several times.
Okay.
So let me just
I'll write
put
it
in
down.
here. Yeah, write it down. The point is to say the welfare state is a question of distribution, right?
Sure.
That is the question of the welfare state. We've got all these groups of non-workers. We've got, and I don't want to repeat them, but the 6 groups that I mentioned.
all the ones that we actually care about.
Right. So we've got all these groups of non-workers, people who struggle to work, things like that. And we've got all these people who are working. Whether we have a declining population, deindustrialization, struggles to climb the value chain, questions about the tax code, whatever, right? Okay. Those are all relevant questions. Those are all reasonable questions to ask, okay? But the question of the welfare state is how do we want to distribute the income that we have in society? I assume we wouldn't suggest that in 30 years we're going to have no income, right?
Sure.
We're going to have a ton
Hopefully
of people working and a ton of these non-workers. The rates hovered around 50-50 essentially for the last, fucking like 40 years or something like that, right? And it was lower back in the 1940s and 50s because women didn't work. And so, for all those reasons, that's why I keep bringing it back. I understand you guys' questions, but fundamentally, we need the welfare state, even in a society with all those problems that you're talking about. And I would argue that even in that society, we should have a relatively expansive welfare state.
starting the welfare state as being about redistribution is not productive. It's that well, I don't know. I feel like but it's not redistribute. If you frame it as redistribution for the point of redistribution, I don't think that would be productive. Even if Econoboi does like redistribution for the point of redistribution, but if it's redistribution for the for the point of for the end of less poverty, I think that is productive, and I think that's its primary argument right here.
Perhaps relative to the time, because maybe there's less income and maybe we have depreciation and stuff, but we still need a wide welfare state.
Okay, a substantive amount of these, though, are not questions. They're statements. They're problems that you and I are coming up with that are effectively going to affect the way that we said. And then you're using what I would say is pretty sanitized language in order to describe things that are actually kind of like worrisome to the fiscal and social conservatives of the country.
But I can agree, Connor, that doesn't change my point. Though.
Hold on. So you're saying something like, well, it's a distribution issue.
It is.
Okay, I'm not stupid. So what I see when the population goes down, and we only have so many options, which is immigration, and you say it's a distribution issue, what you're saying is more taxes. Well, for better or worse,
Right.
fiscal... I would love to hear how we need to increase distribution without increasing taxes.
Replicators like in Star Trek.
Well,
Social wealth,
we're not there
sovereign
yet.
wealth fund.
Yeah.
So
Serious and start-
we're not there yet. We're not there technologically. So then the question becomes, so you're saying it's a question of distribution. You're saying like, oh, we can just increase this tax like 0.75%. People won't even notice. It's not that big of a deal. Who cares?
Not what I said.
Well, I feel like I remember that from about 30 minutes ago. But the point that...
Wait, what did it?
Technologically. So then the question becomes, so you're saying it's a question of distribution. You're saying like, oh, we can just increase this tax like 0.75%. People won't even notice. It's not that
75%. He said 0.75%, right?
That's not what I said.
Well, I feel like I remember that from about 30 minutes ago. But the point that is that I like to think of myself as a fairly rational, statist, Burkean conservative some of the time. People hate that, but that's the way that I feel. Everyone else is to the right of me on this issue. They want more fiscal conservatism. They want less taxes. They don't want more.
Well,
These are not
an issue.
incompatible
It's
conversations.
an issue of volume.
Yeah.
So if the excess resources generated per person is, let's just say, like 1% of a labor unit, whatever that means. Let's say a human requires 80 labor units. I'm using a fictional thing to represent value. And they produce 100. That means one person doing work will provide an excess of 20. Now, hold on. That person wants that 20 for themselves. I get to go to the movies. I don't have to work on the weekends. So when we decide we're going to tax a portion of the units they produce, if we take one unit of labor from that person, they might not notice and say, okay, fine, at least I got enough time off on the weekends. But that one is not going to sustain a single individual. If you have 100 million people and they're all working, you're now generating a ton of excess labor, which can be distributed as a welfare state. But with a population collapse, your volume is going to decrease, and the total amount will exponentially decrease that you can support in a welfare state due to a decrease in volume. In standard business, this requires a price increase. You can either sell 1 million widgets for $1, or you can sell one widget for $1 million if you want to pay your bills.
Yeah, so Econoboi, the question is, is your answer to that problem, because Tim and I have brought this problem up repeatedly, is your answer effectively automation, integration, better tax structure?
Well, yes and no. So I already said about 45 minutes.
I know. It's like he said, how many times is he going to have to say, the welfare is about, just getting income to people who wouldn't get income in a market system.
Or something like that. Pretty close to the beginning of the conversation, that it's entirely possible that if we become South Korea 20 or 30 years from now, right? Where we have just
Demographically,
incredible,
you mean?
Yeah, demographically, right? So we're very skeptical on immigration. People aren't having kids, right? And we have this huge demographic imbalance. It's very possible that we'll have to cut benefits because of some fiscal sustainability issues, right? Like eventually you probably don't have enough money to distribute at current levels, but we have benefits that are tied to inflation, and if deflation happens, you just lower the benefits commensurately, right? It's all about achieving what we think of as a relative standard of living. And when I say relative, I mean to the time. So it's possible that what you're saying does happen. Maybe in 20 or 30 years, nobody's having any kids, innovations go down, we're just kind of poor, right? For various reasons. We just don't have the money to redistribute like we used to. And so we'll have to adjust our expectations of what basic needs means, like you said. But that's not a comment on how much, relatively speaking, within societies we should distribute to people who are struggling with these things that I talked about.
So why are you so hopeful? It pisses me off.
No, well, I'm not hopeful. It's just
optimism.
Yeah, he's like, it'll be fine. We'll figure it out. We'll dial it in, guys.
Dog, that's not what he said.
Because, okay, think about it. Like Ben said. So let's say that we have, I don't know, like we have $5 trillion that we want to redistribute, right? And maybe about that's what government spending is, right?
We should, before, I don't know how much time we have, but okay, so then we will talk about debt, servicing the debt, all that kind of stuff.
Let's say that we have $5 trillion that we want to redistribute. That's what we can kind of like afford, quotation marks.
Sure.
And we distribute it based on, these different groups that I talked about, and like maybe we have some military needs or whatever that is. And we go into the future and all these calamitous things happen. And let's just say, God, damn, we can only raise $4 trillion, right? Like that's like the most we can raise. Well, distributionally, there's no reason to think that we would all of a sudden not have unemployment benefits. We would not have retirement benefits. We would not have maybe a basic income. We would not have student benefits. Maybe those benefits just have to go down some amount, right? But fundamentally, just last thing, we need welfare, and we need a lot of it, relatively speaking, to prevent all these people from living in poverty.
I'm not a minarchist or an anarchist.
I was going to say this real quick because you brought up U.S. debt, so I brought up the U.S. debt clock. I think it's fair to say that.
Oh my God, are you fucking kidding? I'm going to game end myself. Are they ever going to engage? My point, which he has repeated like 3 times by now, which is like, I understand, like maybe it's entirely possible that this could be, something that we have to adjust for, like relative to the time, relative to how much we can afford at the time. But like fundamentally, this is still like a thing we need. Like, X percent of the economy has to be redistributed, even if, the economy shrinks because or at least, stops growing as fast because, we see decrease in population or whatever. Like, it's like, okay, dog, like we're never gonna
that we've already traveled well beyond the capability of the welfare system, and now the ship is sinking, and we're pretending like it's not.
Yeah.
122% debt to GDP.
Japan's at 240.
We have, there's you have to look at sort of taxes as a percent of GDP, like how much does the United States tax compared to other countries. The only thing I was going to say was the reason why we run such high deficits is because we just choose to. Like we could obviously tax more and solve the fiscal problems that we have, and you absolutely could.
So
we can't.
Let me tell you.
Fucking kill me. And also, I'm very surprised Econoboi has not mentioned a sovereign wealth fund yet, because I feel like you could easily design a sovereign wealth fund that is, deficit neutral. Obviously, there's an opportunity cost to the sovereign wealth fund in that instead of paying out you can tax resource rents and pay down the debt rather than have it be invested in a fund that pays out benefits. Or you could, I guess you could have a debt reducing sovereign wealth fund that invests in, taxes, resource rents, invest in a bunch of companies, and then you take that money, instead of paying out benefits, you pay down the deficit. I guess you could do that. So there's still an opportunity cost, but you could design a, on its face at least, deficit neutral sovereign wealth fund that wouldn't not have a lot of these issues that they are talking about with debt.
You guys know how far away from the city we are right now.
Sure.
We're not in the sticks per se, like in the central West Virginia, where you're 5 hours from the nearest city.
Sure.
No, about an hour. There's Winchester. It's a town of, I think, what is Winchester? 30,000 or 40,000. That's the closest city to us. Martinsburg, I think, is like 10,000. So we're about an hour and a half outside of any major metro. Probably a little bit more. Well, to be fair, we're an hour from Frederick, I guess. 300,000. A bungalow in a rural area. How much do you think that costs?
Based off of the current economy, 300 grand.
You're wrong.
More?
What do you think it is?
When you say bungalow, you mean like a really small house?
Yeah, like a 1,000 square foot house.
Bungalows are single-story, 1,000-square-foot homes.
In central West Virginia?
Right, we're not central. We're in the Eastern Panhandle, so we're not that far. But how much do you think a bungalow goes for in this area?
Oh, right here. Well, in this area, we're right outside of DC.
An hour and 40 minutes outside of DC, you mean?
It's still going to be really expensive because you have all these people commuting in.
If it's $500,000, I want to take a hammer.
It's 600,000.
Yeah, I want to take a hammer and hit myself in the head.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
So how is a young person who's getting an entry-level job in the city?
Why are we talking about housing affordability? What? First of all, presumably Econoboi will bring this up, but YIMBYism based. Second of all, I'm pretty sure redistribution and welfare benefits and cash benefits to people probably going to be more conducive towards young people buying homes than wait, I can just increase demand because of Sandbox? Oh hell yeah. But I think it's going to be even more. Fuck these poor people, actually. Probably probably only going to be more conducive to people buying homes for the first time rather than no redistribution. But also, why? What the fuck? What the fuck? Why does it have to? Why we're supposed to be talking about welfare? What the fuck?
How do they start a family and buy a home? And I'll tell you why this number matters. How much do you
I
think
think
a bungalow
because
cost
20 million probably
3 years ago in this area?
Oh yeah, like 200K.
200K. Yeah. There was a house not far from here that we were looking at. It was
You're getting depressed.
The Gen Z producers are throwing up right now. Guys, I'm looking at the Gen Z producers. I don't know.
Yeah,
There's
you're
no camera.
screwed. Sorry, guys.
There was a bungalow. There was a bungalow in this area for 250.
Yeah.
3 years ago. Now it's 600.
Yeah, that was a steal.
And it's crazy because back then I was like, there's no reason. I don't need investment properties. I'm not going to buy it. I was encouraging other people. My brother, like, hey, maybe you should buy this one. He didn't. We went and looked at it. Now it's 600.
Yeah.
And I went and looked at a house the other day, also in this area, and it's 450, and it's dilapidated.
Well, so
anyway, sorry. My ultimate point is, with the debt to GDP ratio, the lack of new workers coming in, and the taxation level we're at right now, you cannot take more from.
Simultaneously, 20 million illegal immigrants that are coming in a country every fucking year, but there's no new workers coming. Oh my God.
Gen Z already.
I
You
disagree.
disagree?
Are they just not listening to? It just feels like a Connor Tim Pool circle jerk, and like occasionally they'll let Econoboi say something, but they don't really internalize it because they just go right back to talking about, well, maybe welfare is good, but we can't fund it. It's because labor participation, workforce shrink. It's like, okay, dog.
They can't afford to start families. They can't afford to buy homes. And you're saying, let's take more money from them.
Well, let me explain this. So,
blood from a stone.
you brought it. You mentioned you mentioned Japan earlier.
Sure.
And Japan's actually a great example to talk about what Tim's talking about. So Japan, declining population, crazy debt to GDP, right?
High standard of living.
Very, very high standard of living, and very affordable housing. How do they accomplish that? They just have a way.
I don't think Japan has that high standard of living. I've seen no opinion talk about it before.
People.
But
No. They just have a way more efficient and better system for building housing, right? And so, to the point that Tim's making, it's not that what Tim is saying is an unreasonable thing to care about, right? Like, obviously, affordable housing is important, but we're linking all of these different conversations. Oh, we have a high debt. We might have a decreasing population. Housing is more expensive. That's completely irrelevant to the fundamental point of we need to distribute money to non-workers. And I agree. Look, we need a better tax code. We need a way better system for building housing, and population decline is a problem. But even if I take all those things to be true, we still need to give a lot of money to these people.
Let me say this. I agree that I'm a fan of welfare systems.
Communist.
I personally, I consider myself to be kind of like
it's like Econoboi didn't get the memo that you can no longer flex European and Asian economies around. Yeah.
liberal, but liberal these days just means like, do you agree with their worldview or not?
Sure.
So if I said something like,
good night.
I personally got unemployment benefits before, and it really helped me. I lost my job through no fault of my own, went through a lawsuit, and while I was in this limbo period for several months, I filed for unemployment and kept up with it, followed the rules, and they paid me like $100 a week, some ridiculous amount of money. But that fed me, and I'm appreciative of that system. I've also worked for homeless shelters, and I have personally met many homeless people.
Does he mean ridiculously? $100 a week is not. Does he mean ridiculously low? That's not. I mean,
who, through no fault of their own, ended up losing their property, losing their job, but quickly
he
turned
must
things
mean
around when given the opportunity. But that is the
He doesn't
minority
think that's
of homeless
high,
people.
right?
Most homeless people are homeless because they cannot not be homeless, and a lot of them want to be homeless. So, for instance, there's a group that calls themselves the
God. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some subset of homeless people, but like also, one, if we just built more homes and homes were more affordable. Two, if we just had better rehab centers for a lot of the drug addicts, which I think is like 30% of homeless people or something, or drug addicts or whatever. And if we just had, better, if we were just like Finland, okay, and had like homeless shelter, like we just offered homeless people homes. But Japan's standard of living is kind of dire. I don't know if it's dire, but Japan's standard of living is not incredibly high, but it's not low or stagnant, as people assume from GDP per capita stagnation because it is shrinking workforce. That makes sense, but
rats in Wisconsin, in Washington. These are young people who refuse to get off the streets. They want to be a part of this group. They receive welfare benefits. Then in California, one of the biggest problems with homeless people in California where I worked is if you go to them and say, we will literally take a house, it's a 3-bedroom. You can live in it like a house. They go, no, we refuse. Give me money instead. And if you walk up to them and say, I would like to give you food or I'd like to give you clothing, they'll say, give me money instead. What they end up doing is they end up receiving benefits, and they use it on, what we see a lot of is, they'll stand outside of a supermarket, they'll tell young people, I got $200 in food benefits. I'll buy whatever you want, just give me $100. And then young people, not always young people, this is big in Seattle, they'll be like, deal, I get $200 for the groceries for me, and you get $100 for heroin. And that's what they end up doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tim, obviously, so we're now talking about like sort of mechanically how do you distribute benefits and like how should we prevent people from like using benefits for drugs or whatever, or like people say if you give child allowances, what if the money doesn't actually go to the children, right? And here's what I'll say. Here I'll make a big point and then I'll directly address your point. The big point is there's just so much research on this. There's so much research on what do poor people do with the benefits that they get, right? What do they do, right? And the overwhelming amount of that money, right?
Like
90,
education,
95,
housing,
99% of it, right? Depending on the program. goes towards just the things that poor people need to live. It goes towards rent. It goes towards food. It goes towards their car payments, right? Or whatever their circumstances are. Now, to the exact type of person that you're talking about, Tim, which is a huge minority of the people that are receiving benefits. I mean, think about it, right? There's 70 million people on Medicaid, another 70 million on Medicare. There's hundreds of millions of people in this country who are receiving some kind of cash payment or government benefit, right? The minority of the people that you're talking about, how should we handle them? I mean, I can tell you what some other countries do. Like, for instance, I think it's in Finland, you get cash benefits, which is called like your housing allowance, but it's just cash, right? It's meant to go towards your housing expenses. There are some people who have a history of like not paying their landlord and just like irresponsibly using the money. They have terrible credit. And so the state comes in and says, okay, we're just going to directly pay your landlord, right? Because we can't like trust you with cash. So there is some like paternalism and things like that these systems probably require, but that's not, I certainly wouldn't, I don't know that you're saying that. That's not, some conservatives will say, and that's why we just shouldn't have these benefits, right?
Then
and that's ridiculous.
The solution would be anybody receiving government health benefits should be required to be on a specific diet and engage in specific exercises.
Well, in Econoboi, to kind of move it.
Dog. Seems a little extreme. I don't know. Maybe this is RFK's world. Okay, if you're on food stamps, you got to be on the food stamps diet. What an insane administrative burden to fucking place on the state, but whatever.
Like we're dancing around this point repeatedly. Tim and I, unfortunately for chat, are statists. So they're like, oh, this is just three filthy communists having a conversation about communism, right? That's what they're thinking. Right.
Which degree of communism do you want?
Right. So to your point, I accept that some level of government redistribution needs to exist. I think Tim accepts that as well. So we're filthy communists compared to the chat. So you making that point again, you're not going to find argumentation. But what I think that...
Well, it sounds like what Tim brought
just
that
tax
up
sugar and don't give out unhealthy food and food stamp. Well, I think we should get rid of food stamps, replace it with a cash allowance, and then tax sugar. Yeah. I mean, Econoboi will make this point. But again, like, it's probably just better to, say if we want a healthy society, what should we do for everyone, not just people on food stamps, and, like, taxing sugar is part of that solution. And then not have, like, super high administrative burdens on, giving out food aid or whatever.
Is like this sort of inherent, it seems like it's sort of inherent criticism of the welfare state, right? And it's like that's just very much not a reason.
But the concern, this is the concern. May I? So this is the concern though, is that we have seen perverse incentive systems destroy economies. Okay, so as an example, Venezuela, it was effectively like a mono, what would you call it? Like a mono commodity economy for a long time, generous welfare state. But what happened when their commodity was oil? Yeah. What happened when they kicked out all the capitalists? And what happened when the oil economy didn't do?
What about Norway, buddy? What about a country of actual proper democratic institutions that is a functioning country like Norway? Like, what do we think about? What do we think about that? Do we think that's probably a better example if I can use more analogous to the U.S.?
And so as a result, you have people who are starving, all that kind of stuff. That's something that I absolutely want to prevent here. Yeah. Same thing with...
I can tell you how to prevent it.
Well, sure. Yeah. Let's talk about that momentarily. But if we look at Maoist China, if we look at the Soviet Union, if we look at historical examples of socialism, I think you identify as a social democrat, the socialism has been disastrous through command economy flubs. Now, not just that, but we also see micro disasters. So if we're talking about like California or the Pacific Northwest, I've had these conversations. I know it's anecdotal. However, they're not pleasant places to live in certain regards, even for the ultra wealthy. My family, I hate to bring it up, but I have a family member who
MAGA's... Sorry, Germany, according to MAGA, is no longer a democracy now. A lot of that's true. Yeah. Was Venezuela undemocratic? Maybe undemocratic is the wrong term because you are right. I mean, he got elected. The one dude did get elected, but after that point, number one, yeah, I'm pretty sure he did. Hugo Chavez turned out to be relatively authoritarian and restricted the free press. But Venezuela does not have the same type of strong democratic institutions that the U.S. government has today. To be sure, but like. The real problem with our health is that the sandwich bread reinflates itself after you squish it. True.
The husband makes around, probably more than 150,000. The wife makes more.
But obviously, like, you can have a person who's undemocratic be elected. There's no contradiction in that, you and me. But
50,000 or whatever, but because they were living in the Pacific Northwest in a major urban center, they effectively had to walk through drug-addicted homeless people who were being subsidized by the state, who made the common areas less livable. And so that's where the intent behind what you're saying can be 100% noble. Let's take care of homeless people. Let's get them food. Let's make sure that they have clean needles so they don't pass diseases. But there are rotted urban centers inside the United States of America, particularly in, let's say it, left-leaning cities.
Yes, I know it's possible to elect someone who is authoritarian and does anti-democratic things. Do you reject that? You got him democratically, though. I'm so smart. What's the successor? Wasn't it? I'm pretty sure. I don't know for sure. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure for like Hugo Chavez, like freedom of press restrictions, there's gonna be things that come up like
where the perverse incentives have overtaken the...
During Chavez's presidency in Venezuela, there were significant restrictions on freedom of press, leading to a decline in media diversity and an increase in censorship. If Trump is anti-democratic, but he was elected.
What happened to bread, guys? Because I do not remember bread ever being like this.
Fucking kidding
Pushing
me.
it just doesn't feel like it's real bread.
True, it's rubber. They're feeding us
And just
fake bread,
squished this,
government
it should
fake
be
bread.
completely demolished.
That's because of America's psyops. Okay. This is what RFK is gonna fix.
The original noble intent. And so that's what I think a lot of people are worried and scared about.
Well, look, I wouldn't put,
Angry.
I wouldn't want Gavin Newsom to be in charge of designing my ideal welfare state.
Sure.
Right? I don't think. I think that there are a lot of
Swedish guy.
Yeah, exactly. We need some Swedish guy. But no, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of problems within, I think, democratic politics with regards to how we talk about these things, and certainly the solutions. It's ironic because, like, you have a lot of Democrats that they're like, oh, we need to do this, that, and the other to prevent exactly what you guys are talking about. But the answers are actually a lot simpler, right? So I advocate for things like universalizing welfare benefits, having an efficient tax code. You talk about homeless people in these urban cities, right? One of the things that I find so interesting when you see like people who travel to Nordic countries and they come back, one of the first takeaways that they have is there's just no homeless people. What the hell? Like, I thought you go to a major city, there's just a shitload of homeless people.
So hold
right?
on.
Well,
Real quick meme. They freeze to death. Continue.
well, no, because there's a lot of homeless people in like cities like Detroit and stuff, right? That are very visible, right?
They also freeze to death. But continue.
But they're very visible, right? I mean, you get what I'm saying. Like, that's not really true. Same thing with Canada and a lot of those urban centers, right?
noticed
So
that
it's like, what are those
they
countries
never
doing, right? It's not that they don't have people that
bread.
struggle with housing. What do they do? They offer pretty generous benefits to people to get into housing. They offer housing first approach to people. They
No,
do job-
dude, this may be okay. So I think I watched like the first kind of little bit of the conversation. I missed a lot of the last section. I think I came back at this point. I remember though. I think I was talking to my dad for a little bit while I paused this or whatever. I just came back watching it live, and I think oh my god, what Tim Pool does here pisses me the fuck off.
jobs, training. Like, there's just
It's going to take a little bit to get to it, but oh my god.
this sort of holistic benefit, and they tend to have either a non-market system or an efficient market system for distributing housing. Like, it ends up being very affordable. Take a city like San Francisco, right? A city like San Francisco will dump a ton of money, like nominal dollars, into public housing. Oh, we're going to build public housing, and we're going to let homeless people live there, and then they're not homeless, they'll get on their feet and all that stuff. One of the biggest problems with these cities is not the fact that they want to offer benefits, right? Which is kind of, it seems like how we're framing the conversation. It's not the benefits themselves. It's the fact that in San Francisco, the zoning ordinances are so ridiculously constrictive that to build like 100 units of public housing costs $100 million or some ridiculous amount, right? And so that's a problem holistically of governance, right? But it's certainly not a problem with the welfare state or the idea that we would offer things like cash benefits, clean needle exchanges, like all those things that you just
Econoboi,
mentioned.
I want you to hear me, okay?
I'm hearing you.
This is a safe space amongst three communists who are all discussing how to distribute the economy. Okay, this is a safe space. All right.
Let's share the wealth.
Yeah, right. So we are talking about how we distribute these things, but I think that, so for instance, exactly what you're saying with housing, there are a lot of well-intended left-leaning people, liberals, Democrats, all that kind of stuff, and they talk about things that I think are criminally insane as if it's completely normal. One of them is the NIMBY movement, right, or the YIMBY movement, right? So not in my backyard versus yes in my backyard.
You think YIMBYs are insane?
I think YIMBYs are a little insane.
Okay.
And so the reason why.
First of all, even if YIMBYs are insane, we still need welfare. But second of all, what the fuck?
Is because the cities, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, right, the biggest cities in the world or whatever, they're already very claustrophobic, tens of thousands of people crammed together, elbow to elbow, all that kind of stuff. Their solution to housing costs is already very claustrophobic. They build cities that
First of all, if it's a crowded and such a shitty place to live, why does everyone want to live there? Why are real estate prices still so high? Like what? Like if people don't want to live in crowded places, they'll move to other places. Like the markets account for this. It's just that it fucking killing.
people want to live in for, I would say, intangible reasons.
Although to be fair, like I understand, there's friction in the housing market, but crowded, but it's all single family homes and high risk. I know, yeah. Haas is awesome.
Because they want to be cool, they want to be in New York, they want to be in Los Angeles, they want to be in Miami. Their solution is to take a 1,500 square foot apartment and then split it up into 3 500 square foot units. That doesn't sound like human thriving to me. That sounds like a rat's nest. So that's where the intent of some of these policies, it's like we need to think more comprehensively about the kind of lives that we want to build for human beings. And I feel like the left sometimes, generally speaking, has very terrible ideas.
When we talk about major
You're
cities,
saying it's only an effective governance,
Well-
which I agree with, but the governance matters because what's
Oh my god, these places are not crowded. Yeah, I know. Especially look at San Francisco. San Francisco is not fucking. New York is probably the only fucking U.S. city that could actually be considered crowded. Okay, look at the population density in fucking Paris. Compare it to any fucking U.S. city. Like, oh my god, like New York might be denser than Paris, but it's probably the only one. Paris population density. Like 19,000 per square kilometer. New York. That's mile. 11,000 people per square kilometer. San Francisco is less, like half of New York's fucking like.
popular on the left. So that's incredibly stupid.
Look, if we're talking about we have an immovable object, an unstoppable force here, right?
Paris is
we have a
pretty
shitload of people
sparse.
who want to live in LA.
I chose Paris because I think it's an example of a dense city, but it might even I don't even know if Paris is denser than like other European cities. I honestly don't know.
Right, yeah. We have a shitload of people who want to live in LA, and we obviously have a limited geographic area, right? And so the natural solution to that YIMBYs would suggest is build densely. Now, obviously, hey, if you want to have a 2,000 square foot home in the middle of LA, it's just going to be really expensive, right? Even if you do the policies that YIMBYs are talking about, right, you're going to have to pay a lot more for a huge apartment. But I don't know that that's necessarily bad for people's culture or sense of community. Look at a city like Tokyo, biggest city on the planet. It's an insanely sprawling, just metropolis, right? They have very affordable units. They have units that are much more expensive, but it's very, very densely built. When you go to places like that, everyone who visits there, people who live there, there's a not famous, but he's a Noah Smith. He's a guy who blogs a lot. He actually lives in Japan most of the time in Tokyo. They don't talk about, like, I guess in some sense it's like, oh, I wish I had more space in some intrinsic sense, but it's like, damn, it's so nice to live in a dense area with like all this stuff around me. There's so much to do. That's the reason why people go to cities like that, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too and be like, I should have a $100,000 home in a place that millions of people want to live.
No,
right?
I agree with you that that's a stupid impulse. But
And so just to add to that, the problem with a lot of these cities is they require civil servants to live in those city boundaries. So then you end up with problems in Chicago.
You're talking about like in New York, they're like, you have to live in New York to be a police officer.
I believe it's true for most jurisdictions. San Francisco, for instance, you want to be a cop there, you got to live in the city limits. Good luck. They don't pay you enough to afford a house there.
Well, that's dumb. I agree.
We could argue that this is an issue of governance, though.
Yeah.
So, for instance, like here's your commie take of the day. I think that there effectively should be affordable districts within the country, within the city, where you just know that your working class is going to work there. So, for instance, like New York City, one of the most expensive, beautiful cities. Well, not beautiful. It's actually a rat's nest.
Paris is dense for
one
European
of the
city,
most
but not
sought after
compared to
is what I
Asian
was
city
looking for cities
ones.
on the planet.
That's fair, but also I would never use the Asian city as an example just because conservatives would freak the fuck out. They'd be like, fucking poverty, fentanyl. Like, Asian cities are just too. I mean, there are plenty of cities in Japan that Econoboi brought up Tokyo that are probably fine, but like I would never use like Manila as an example, because they just have not as clean of an image.
Basically, swaths of Brooklyn should be held for the working class because they are the people who make the city run, and they should not have to have a 3-hour commute in order to make it.
But hold on, project housing has typically failed.
Well, but Tim, project housing has failed because
other reasons.
Well, yeah, we just don't do it right. I mean, like I think that, for instance, when you look at Singapore is a very densely populated, and it's a city, right? So I think a lot of people say, oh, we can't.
What Tim's about to do? Oh my God. Did it make me want to game at myself so hard?
Singapore applied to the country.
If you want to
Manila isn't that bad either. I thought Manila was pretty bad, but I don't know.
If you want to argue that we should cane people in public for violating the law,
yes,
conservative take. Yeah, no.
That's what Singapore does, and that's why they.
Well, that's not why they have
a nice urban downtown.
That's not why they have affordable housing, though.
Sure,
it actually is.
It's just a benefit.
No, it's not. Then come on, that's right.
Singapore has affordable housing because they cane people in this street. Like, oh my God. Oh my God, 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 oh my God.
If you spit dumb, you can be caned. If you don't flush a toilet, you can be caned.
He's talking about affordability, not necessarily whether or not it's a nice place to live.
No, my point is, the authority structure is completely tied to its economic structure.
Well, I didn't make my point.
So let me tell you, I went to Singapore, and they had a problem with a bunch of, I think it was Filipino and Indian people, who had come in to be used as cheap labor. They were told, you will do this or else. And when they started protesting, they arrested them all and beat them publicly in the street. Yeah. So when you get cheap slave labor from foreign countries to maintain your standard of living, under threat of mercilessly beating them in public, you can maintain those standards of living.
No, that's not. So when we look at the
I'm
reason
sorry for laughing because I'm agreeing with Singaporeans, but
no, but the reason I brought up Singapore was not to talk about like their entire justice system. Obviously, they have a very sort of draconian set of regulations on a lot of things, which I'm sure a lot of them we wouldn't necessarily agree with. Like their drug policy, for instance, is extreme.
Your house
What in the street cane? The beatings.
can't fall apart in a place where they beat you for your house falling apart.
Well, no, not. I don't.
Did you know that they
right?
check the toilets in Singapore? Don't use Singapore as an example. Let's just move on.
I tried looking up this earlier, but I maybe it's true. It just seems absurd on his face. But
no, we're not going to move on.
Okay, in Singapore,
goodness,
there are people where if you leave food on the table, they can report you to the police and you can get in trouble for this. Usually it's a fine. It is considered improper if you don't flush the toilet, and people actually look.
Okay.
So if you have a house and there is gum on the sidewalk, that's illegal. If you have housing in the United States, what do we end up seeing? It gets trashed, it falls apart, and we're required to pay for services from the public coffers to fix it. In Singapore, they beat you in public.
So Tim, the reason I brought up Singapore was not to talk about their civil society. You could say
You
right?
keep trying
Tim,
to
for God's
cut out.
sakes,
No.
You won't let me make the point.
Absolutely, I will not, because you keep changing the subject. You are trying to act like.
It's so fucking. First of all, Econoboi is not the one fucking changing the subject. You guys keep bringing up the most insane, like retarded shit in the fucking world. But regardless, oh my god, just let my boy speak. Just let my boy speak. Oh my god, just let my boy speak. Oh my god, oh my god. Oh my god, please. Oh my god.
Like the
Connor
social
said-
order.
Connor
You're not
said-
going to make a point.
Connor said- no,
You
well,
keep
you're not
changing,
letting me make a
you
point.
keep changing the
Connor
point,
said-
and the social order of a society is connected to its economic to its spending. Houses in
that's-
Chicago are falling apart, and because the public housing is falling apart in Chicago because people mistreat the properties, do drugs, and fire guns at them.
Yeah,
If
Tim.
you did that in Singapore, you would be beaten in public.
So what Singapore does is not just that, Tim. You'd agree they don't have one policy. What Connor said was, I think that working class people should be able to live in, city centers without,
Temple
all
was
these different
the one that jumped from welfare to house. I know, yeah.
bidding wars
Like,
happening, and they just essentially get priced out of the area. How does Singapore do that? They don't
Or
do
actually,
that.
wasn't it? Actually, I forget who it might have been. I remember Connor talking about why YIMBYs were insane. I remember that. He might. I don't know if he was the one that brought it up though. I forgot. I think it was Tim Pool though. I don't think it was Econoboi.
By beating people with canes,
It was not Econoboi. I know it wasn't Econoboi.
they have a non-market public housing system.
Housing is welfare, isn't it? I mean, you can say that like government subsidized public housing is welfare, a type of welfare. I guess you could say that, but.
Right? So that's the thing you wouldn't let me make the point on. That's the point, right? That you have to have all of these things together. You have to have an efficient system for building housing, obviously. I guess if you're Tim or Connor, maybe you, I guess, need to
Who maintains
have
the
some
house?
crazy stuff, right?
Who maintains the house?
The individuals that live there and obviously some public as well.
Okay, so let's break this down. You have public housing.
Yeah.
It has to be maintained by somebody. If someone can't afford to buy and maintain a house, who pays to maintain it?
The state.
Yeah,
State. Okay.
public
Now, in
housing.
Singapore, if you don't maintain your property, they will beat you in public. In Chicago, if you don't maintain
It's so fucked. They won't even let Econoboi
your property,
speak.
it just falls apart and there's drugs and guns everywhere.
Singapore.
I want to.
Drought,
He's
drought,
passionately
drought.
making a point that I thought was an overview of what we were going to talk about today, which is effectively,
Wait, Connor, do you agree with me on the point that just to do what you're talking
they
about,
have
you need a
intentional
system of
policy
public
related.
investment?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, well, we agree,
But-
actually.
But hold on, there's a point here that I think Tim is making very passionately that I agree with, which is effectively that if you're going to have a welfare state, you need a level of what's considered, particularly in America, socially conservative enforcement.
You mean
Because
you're
what
saying
happens
what
when
we
you,
need
what
is
we're worried
beating
about,
people
what
in
we're talking
public.
about entire areas of LA being overrun with the homeless.
See Pokemon complain about wealth. I mean, Pokemon presumably is pretty left leaning, but no, I didn't see that. Is there a clip of it?
Talking about the Pacific Northwest, having all these
I don't
Asian
know.
needles on
Are
the
you
street. We're talking
trolling?
about San Francisco having human feces and that just being like a normal thing.
The U.S. has too much empty space too. True. If someone doesn't want to live in a city, there's plenty of areas that aren't that dense. Bad zoning is welfare for homeowners. That's true, actually. That is very true. Zoning laws are welfare for the boomer home-owning class, okay?
Talking about is we're talking about the state intervening in order to try to make people's lives better, but not feeling like they have the authority to enforce like equality or standards. And so that's where I don't think that you can have one without the other.
Well, obviously, like to address your points, both of your points directly, right?
Well, to me, there's a difference between like you're a billionaire and you can buy power, and like you're an
True,
immigrant
sister.
who hustled and made enough for you and your future family. I will
True.
never become a billionaire. I ever have even an ounce of that amount of money, you give it away. Like, how are you even hitting the B point?
Hey, speak for yourself. No, I'm kidding.
Who
The
the
wealth
fuck
is
is... I've
very
seen that guy in, like, fucking Instagram
Not
Reels.
bad.
The wage gap, I hate that.
No wealth disparity.
Well, disparity.
Wage gap
For
is,
real. I hate periods, too, as he mentioned that.
like, between men and women. Men and women, we love each other, and we hate the rich. Anyways.
Aren't you the rich?
No! Like the
I don't know.
ultra rich, the ultra giga rich, the unnecessary.
It's just like Bernie Sanders when he switched from millionaire to billionaire.
To
Terribly
clarify, they're gonna clip that and then it's gonna make you look bad.
Oh,
You
the
gotta
ultra
say,
giga
you
rich.
gotta say the billionaires.
The billionaires.
you are rich.
The Bezos. Well, to me,
She's been watching Gary's Economics. Pokey's a figure. Yeah, but no, Pokey definitely is a multi-millionaire. Oh, shit. Tyler with the rate of 9. Let's fucking go. What's up, people? Support rate. I appreciate it, Tyler. Hell yeah. She's not 9 figures yet. Pokemon would never be a fucking billionaire. Pokemon definitely, top 1% for sure, I would imagine.
well, to me,
I think top 1% in America is probably like $1 million. It's like $1 million or $3 million a year or something.
I'm sorry,
So,
Mr. Stark,
Pokemon
but do
definitely.
you
Oh, what the
honestly
fuck?
expect us
Why is
to
it
believe
playing
that
Iron Man? No. This is not going to be accurate. Billion is 10 figures? What? Oh, no, you're right, yeah. If you're broke, why just say so? Wait, hold on. I forgot the Twitch payout leak. Where's the leaderboard? $1 million over 3 years, I think. Yeah, 2019 to 2021. And this is just Twitch revenue, not including YouTube revenue, merch revenue, all their other shit. Sponsorships. Anyway, no, top 1% is less than 1 million. Less than 1 million a year? It probably is, actually. Hold on. We gotta continue watching this. Right as we're watching Econoboi be fucking censored on Tim Pool, okay? No offense. It's been a Tim Pool Econoboi. Tim Pool and fucking Connor have probably spoken 80% of this fucking episode. It's probably less than 80%, but
when it comes to like, what do we do with these people who are just on drugs and they're fucking everything up in downtown for us?
Yep.
Obviously, look, I mean, I think look at the city of Houston.
You're about to get accused of being a Nazi. But
Well, no. I mean, look at the city of Houston. The city of Houston, they decreased their homeless population by about 50% over the last 12 years. And the city of Houston's a city with a revenue cap, right? They literally cannot raise taxes to like infinite levels because the people say you can't do that, right? So they had to figure out a creative way to do this. What they did was they had a camping ban mixed with public housing for homeless people, and essentially they said, hey, if you're homeless and there's room in the shelters, you've got to go to the shelters. And then the shelters are connected with like resources for homeless people, hey, rehab, clean needle, all these kind of stuff, right? And that decreased the homeless population by like 50%, right? Now, to be fair to Tim's point, we didn't do that by beating the shit out of homeless people on the street, but we did say you have to do certain things and there's certain obligations that you have. I don't necessarily disagree with that. My only point about Singapore was that they have a huge system of public
living. Well, yeah, obviously.
Non-market housing, which is one of the fundamental ways that you can extend affordable housing to people, in addition to those behavioral things you're talking about.
So let's pull this up. Pruitt, Igoe, probably the most famous instance of failed public housing.
Someone in Kelly needs more than someone in Iowa. Wow, no one has ever considered this.
Why did it fail? Crime, vandalism, juvenile delinquency. I agree. If we were to create a massive 33-building, 11-story complex.
Very true, very true. One day. I'm telling you, 2028, I'm warning you guys. I'm going to be the most evil fucking person ever. Is it going to be Nonfon arguing against the wealth taxes, arguing against is going to be, if any Democrat supports lowering the corporate income tax, okay, they're my candidate, okay? It's going to be, as Tyler would say, GDP first, libertarian. 2028 Trump v. Obama. That'd be depressing, but we need more people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, not less. Very true. First, we just need to stop oppressing successful people so much. Successful people, which is what I call billionaires, are too oppressed and too hated, too persecuted in modern day society.
Housing, cheap, for people who can't afford it, to replace tenement housing. It can work if you go to the people who are destroying it.
I know, yeah. I posted on Twitter, like, under an Econoboi tweet one time. I said the billionaire class is utility maximizing. And and someone replied with a picture of Elon Musk, and I was like, that's a fair point, actually. I don't know. I didn't consider that. Maybe they're not utility maximizing. Successful people equals Israel. Kamala versus Musk. Oh, kill me. Oh, kill me. Run fucking central bankers in 2028. What we need. We need Jerome Powell and Ben Bernanke.
It and mercilessly beat them in public when they do, because that's how Singapore maintains what you're talking about. You keep
Econoboi was
like, oh fuck, I totally forgot.
You keep trying.
What about the city of Houston, Tim?
You keep trying.
What about the city of Houston?
You keep trying to exclude the enforcement of
Shout
law
out
from the
Tyler.
things we're spending.
I just said you need an enforcement of these things. I just don't.
W streamer. I think he has a YouTube channel too, but I don't know if I don't think he has touched it in a while.
Indeed.
Beating them in the street is right. What about the city of Houston?
I agree. We don't need to beat them in the street. The point I said was don't use Singapore as an example, because that's how
I used Houston as an example.
Then we agree that if Houston has social enforcement, you will lose your house if you vandalize it. You will be kicked out. Then people stop doing these things.
Yeah, well,
but we have in these cities like Portland needles all over the street.
Yeah.
You can compromise on compassionate beating.
Well, Tim, I mean, obviously, I don't know that. Look, I'm not. I'm from Texas, not Portland, right? So
Yeah.
I remember.
Some of it, how it works. We encourage our dumbest to vote and run ads nonstop to pander them, so it's a popularity contest. Bankers. Mark Carney is like the ultimate central banker, and he just fucking won in Canada. That's what I was going for. That's the meme. That number for 1% makes sense, since that amount plus puts you right around salary VP, investment banker, senior stat. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Yeah. Other than that monopoly guy, bankers haven't won a single popularity contest. I mean, I think it honestly. I mean, I don't know exactly why Mark Carney won, but why? Oh, fuck! I'm gone. Fuck. Okay, you're gonna have to give me a second. Why do you think the projects failed in the U.S.? It's not literally culture. What projects failed? You mean like projects like housing projects? I kind of talked about it earlier. Like because of a lot of it is zoning laws. I'm sure some of it is culture. I'm not gonna say none of it is culture. I'm certain that there's a culture that exists amongst a lot of poor people in the U.S. that is not as conducive to I don't know, spending welfare money responsibly as it is in Scandinavian countries, maybe. But I don't know. I feel like that could be changed as well. But Mark Carney's so based on ironically 150 IQ econ chat. I know, dude. If Canada actually does NGDP targeting, that'll be so fucking funny, man. He has a He has a thing where he endorsed it once. Now, I don't know exactly what control he has over the central bank as the prime minister. Like, I don't know. Like, in the U.S., you could just pass a law changing the monetary framework, I think, to end GDP targeting. I think the central bank even might be able to just decide that end GDP targeting is, you know, is conducive towards their goals of maximum employment and minimum inflation, price stability. But is Jay Powell tall enough to be president? That's a good point, actually. Appoint Scott Sumner to BOC. Very true. Very true. That would be hella based. Make him. Actually, I was gonna say, make him like every country's central banker. But what's nice about rule-based monetary policy is that you don't actually need, you know, it's rule-based. It's not discretionary. You don't even need a good like central banker. Okay, my webcam might be like laggy because it's over Wi-Fi now rather than over wire. But it's Jerome Powell. I thought Jerome Powell was shorter than that, but that's good. He can be president. How tall is Bernanke?
Friend who she's from Texas as well. She worked in San Francisco for a while, and she's super woke, liberal, socialist type. And she comes back from San Francisco, and she's like, you know, honestly, they're way too far. Like they're way more woke than even like your Texas socialists, I guess, which is kind of funny to think. So I'm from Texas, I'm not from San Francisco. If you say, hey, you know, you can't like start beating the shit out of people and breaking windows and doing drugs if you're gonna
rule-based monetary policy. I mean, I think okay. We're still distracted from the video right now. Like I said earlier, sometimes when I don't know enough about something, I just feel like I need people who are smarter than me to fight it out so I can make a decision. I need to see a debate between Sam and Micah. Sam debating Micah on rule-based monetary policy, or Sam debating Jason Harrison, or Sam might not even be the best person to debate monetary policy, but I know Sam does not like NGDP targeting. I need to see a debate between like him and Micah, or him and some other Jason Harrison who likes NGDP targeting. Sam can debate. He's British, exactly.
Be in social housing, I'm not going to have a huge problem with that. If we look at the city of Houston, which is why I use that as an example, this is a city that can't raise a lot of taxes. They have to come up with creative solutions to do things, and they did that. And obviously, they did that without the extreme social policies of Singapore, right?
But still enforced.
Bro.
Well, but Tim, I've never said we shouldn't enforce.
And also, I mean, Scandinavian countries don't have the insane social conservatism, whatever, caning in public. They still seem to do well in housing.
You did. I said don't use Singapore as the example because they do.
Tim, what did I use Singapore as an example for?
Public housing market.
Yeah.
And I said don't use an example because they maintain it by beating people in public.
Through vicious beatings, not
They
compassionate
also
beatings.
maintain it through public investment.
Okay, we're three communists here sharing our love of
Let me
communism.
say it
This is
one
sarcastic
more
for the sake of the
time.
Say it one more time, and that'll be
You
last.
don't need to spend as much money on property when it's not being vandalized because you beat the people mercilessly in public if they do.
Okay.
If the
What is this
cost of
slander in
Igoe was
Singapore? I'm fairly certain Singapore does do caning. I think Tim Pool is probably exaggerating to the extent at which it happens. I don't know if there's really public beatings, but I do actually think they do like caning in prisons.
$100 million to fix because of the vandalism, and the cost to fix the Singaporean is $1 million because of the merciless beatings. One can be sustained and one cannot.
Yes,
but I must say this. I must add, I can solve the gang violence and shooting problems in Chicago like that.
I'm curious.
Constitutionally?
No. If the punishment.
It's a fucking Connor, Tim Pool, circle jerk, okay? They won't let Econoboi speak, and they definitely won't let him speak about welfare, okay? It's Connor and Tim Pool talking, and they raise some objection to Econoboi eventually. That's like very only tangentially related to welfare.
For shootings in Chicago was they would force you to wear a diaper and a baby bonnet and make you crawl across Roosevelt Avenue while saying, I'm a big baby boo-boo on camera while everyone got to watch and throw popcorn at you. Not a single one of these people would commit that crime.
I disagree. There's sexual fetishists out there that would enjoy this. So.
You're correct.
Tim wants to bring back the tomato.
My point is,
Public shame.
a lot of what people assume is gang violence in Chicago is actually honor shootings.
Sure.
When people feel disrespected, they kill each other. And this is a total aside. I just want to bring it up in the context.
No, you're right.
If we did have cruel and
Half this conversation has been a total aside.
unusual punishment, and what I mean by that is not torturous, maiming, or anything like that, but literally, we're going to make you wear a diaper and bunny hop down the street, and then you're done.
Sure.
That's all you do over one weekend. People would be like, hell no, I ain't coming that
But Tim, this is where we get into an argument about authoritarianism versus liberalism or libertarianism philosophically. Where are we talking about like an individual society where people are free to live with maximal liberty, or are we talking about an authoritarian society? And here's the thing: as much as I'm for compassionate beatings, you know, I'm a huge fan of this. I still like living in a relatively speaking free society. This is why I can travel to see you. This is why I can, you know, speak my mind on a public platform, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm looking for the balance between freedom and security, and I'm trying to do that as best as I can.
It's interesting
That's kind of
diaper furry
from a
fantasy.
policy perspective. But Econo, you know, you say that I'm dragging away from things, but I'm going to drag it away one more time, okay?
Oh
so
my
let's
god!
say
Oh my!
that
We're already dragged away. How are you gonna drag?
Ideally, in major metropolitan areas, we allow cops, firefighters, EMTs, and retail and service workers who actually make the city function to live in low-cost housing so they can make the city function, okay? I get it, socialism, communism, whatever, Jack and Spurg out. However, if we see a correlated collapse in the
What the hell is a compassionate beating? Good question.
Right, where our major urban centers actually have.
I mean, they're memeing. They're to be clear, they are memeing when they say like compassionate beating. They
less than 2.15 birth rate. What I would probably say is that that's bad urban design. It's a bad culture, and we shouldn't be incentivizing it. And I do think that the United States, not just the United States, I think the
why can't we just tar and feather poor people? True.
Needs to stabilize from a population perspective in order for us to be a species.
We can tie these two things together. Right? So, for instance, I think there was some evidence out of France. They studied their child allowance program, right? So it's like, hey, when you give people cash, like one of the reasons why people don't have kids, right, is because well, they just don't feel like they can afford it, right? Obviously, that's a big reason, or they might have less kids than they otherwise would.
Isn't that kind of like a sorry, continue? But I feel like this is like a reported thing versus like a demonstrated thing. But
well, I was about to get to the evidence, right? So France had this child allowance program, and
there is evidence from Econoboi citing France. I know Mongolia has had some success with basically paying cash transfers for increasing birth rates. Like, seems like it does happen. There's evidence for it. Not that. No offense. I've never spoken to Connor. Okay, I'm sure Connor's a nice dude. I don't think he's really cited any evidence. It seems like he cited a few anecdotes, but I don't think he has Connor ever read a fucking paper about the effects of like welfare. Like I mean he said he did some research for this, but like, no offense, Connor, but.
And they essentially, some mumbo jumbo with the study design. I don't want to get into it, but they found that this actually increased the number of French people by like millions of people over a long period of time. Right?
What did?
Well, their child
we agreed on compassionate beatings.
Their child benefits programs, right? Okay. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that France has like this booming population. It just means that they'd have a much lower than otherwise population if not for these benefits, right? And so the welfare state is perfectly compatible, especially when we're talking about the birth rate. Look, paid parental leave.
How do we optimize that?
All right. Well, I can tell you, right? Paid parental leave, cash benefits when you have kids, having baby boxes that we send to people.
How do you reconcile that?
Public school.
How do you reconcile that with? So for instance, like all these things, I think any sensible social conservative should be for. You should be for high quality early childhood education because you want a smart population. You should be for high quality education because you want a productive population. You should be for people getting socialized and becoming intelligent and all that kind of stuff and getting a good education. So these things I'm perfectly fine with. But what I'm asking though is an optimization, because what you're talking about.
Well, I can tell you. Let me answer your questions.
Real quick, just because I want to complete a thought. You're saying that it increased millions of people. So there are millions of people who were born through social welfare programs that would otherwise not have been born. That's awesome. Is it still below 2.15? Because if we're below 2.15, I think we have a problem.
Yeah. Well, Connor, obviously. So we can look at the most extreme example, perhaps Hungary, right? So Hungary spent on just family benefits, right? They spent like 6% of their GDP. We said earlier in this conversation, the United States spends 3.5% of its GDP on its military.
Right.
So imagine twice the U.S. military. That's the effort that the Hungarians are putting into getting people to have kids.
As a pronatalist, I will accept this as a part of your plan.
Right. Now, I think we should have very generous child benefits. But obviously, it's not a panacea, right? For instance, like one of the reasons why
didn't they bump up temporarily by like 0.1 or 0.2 and then they drop back down?
It has like an all else equal effect. Like there's more people having kids in Hungary than otherwise. But obviously, it doesn't completely reverse the problems. A lot of it is culture. Like, why do Mormons have more kids in Utah than like people in Texas? Well, they have right. Yeah. Well, they have this sort of conservative fundamentalism, and they, on average, let's say they want to have more kids.
So what you're saying is we should lie to people and tell them that if they have a ton of kids, we will all populate the stars.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, I do agree.
Taxes.
That's kind of what Hungary does, and it still doesn't have it doesn't reverse the effect. So
Tim, I agree with you in principle, but that's exclusively going to affect like the most intelligent people who.
If you are married,
2 or 3.
If you are married and have at least 2 children, no taxes.
Well, but Tim, again, that's kind of what Hungary.
This feels like it would. I'm gonna bring up Hungary again. Yeah, it feels like it. Feels like it would have a pretty negative effect on our fucking budget deficit. The role of fiscal conservatives, okay, until it comes to increasing the birth rate, in which case, okay, we can spend fucking infinite money on this shit. I tell ya. After saying Econoboi, have you considered lay deficit? Have you considered I can bring up debt clock and see big number? Now they don't care.
It does, and it just doesn't. Like, financial reasons are only
still things should be done.
Well, yeah, but financial reasons are only so big a portion of why people are not having kids, right?
Sure.
And so even if we have a lot of benefits, they're not going to have a ton of kids altogether. I think that
Do you believe getting on a culture? Sorry, I know
we need to return to shock. We need to return to shock therapy. Shock therapy and have a new liberalism. Very true.
Wing, especially on social media.
I feel like this is focused in places that offer women option to advance in community rather than motherhood. I feel like this is focused on places that offer woman option to advance in community other than motherhood. Yet 2/3 of the world is opposite. Well, I mean, most of the your mother. I mean, most of the developed countries are going to be the former case, right? Like basically every developed country has decent rights for a woman, has decent opportunities for a woman outside of motherhood, which I understand obviously increases the opportunity cost of having children, but.
Of the left, where like liberal
we already have this concept called child tax credit, and it often serves as a negative income tax. Yeah, their child tax credit is fucking based. Although probably, I mean, I'm sure all else equal, it probably has some positive effect in birth rate, but it is not that high.
Say, your life is for you. There's no afterlife. So what you need to do is you need to maximize your pleasure in this life, and you need to minimize your pain.
Yeah.
And so as a result, don't have kids.
Sure.
And so I think that this combined with the technologies of condoms and the technologies of birth control, that partially contributes to it. So for my thing is like, are you pronatal? Are you going to have kids?
I mean, well, yeah, I don't want to talk about my family planning.
Well, I want
obviously. I'd hope I'd have kids one day.
Okay.
But anyway, the point is though is that
How old are you?
I'm 28.
Okay.
Yeah, so not an old man like Connor over here.
Yeah,
with
but I have,
his
two,
beard.
I have 2 kids.
I actually do want to stress this too. And fully admitting, I just had my first kid this year. 28 is old to have a kid, historically.
Yeah. I mean, obviously,
I'm way
historically, historically that's true. I mean, but I think when we talk about collapsing birth rates, actually, that's a good segue. Is that when we talk about like birth rate collapse, what you find is really not that people are just, how do I put this? It's not that people are like deciding to have less kids necessarily. When you look at birth rates by age cohort, right, you see that
A lot of it is just a drop in teen pregnancy, I think he's about to say, which from my understanding is true.
Well, essentially, what you find is that the reason why we have
Maybe
birth rates,
notice, but you sound like you don't. The human population increases by 1 to 1.2% per year. I mean, that makes sense to me. Multiply that by 7.8 Phil.
declining is because teenagers aren't having kids anymore.
But a lot of that is obviously concentrated in developing countries. But
Right. Overwhelmingly, the reason why birth rates are declining is because we don't have teenage pregnancy.
20-year-olds aren't either.
Well, 20 to 24 are going down as well, and part of that is because women entering the workforce, getting an education. I think that this is why it kind of bumps into what Connor was saying earlier, which is like, look, at the end of the day, the welfare state cannot solve all issues. And when we're talking about like, oh, women aren't having as many kids because they're deciding to work and get educations, I mean, like, what are we supposed to do about that, guys?
Well, I mean, I don't see any women, but basically, my wife, thankfully, was like, "Hey, I love having kids. I like taking care of them when they're young. I want that to be my priority," and we just meshed on that. I've been very fortunate. Despite not being a rich man, my wife hasn't had to work since 2020.
You mentioned the liberal idea of
I'm sure part of it, Corbin, is that women don't have a lot of opportunities other than motherhood in those countries. But it's also just because the opportunity cost is lower. It's just because, like, in a lot of these developing countries, children offer employees for your fucking subsistence farm versus in the U.S. children are, just take time away from being a fucking investment banker making a fuck ton of money. Like,
maximize your
it's just as your country gets higher productivity, the opportunity cost like necessarily increases.
minimize your pain.
Hedonism.
But I think the issue is that if you've never had a kid, you don't realize how much more like
It's so much deeper. It's so much deeper.
Like, I'm gonna embarrass my wife right now. She was looking at our baby daughter and started crying because of just how much she loved the baby and how cute she was. And I started laughing, and then she smiled. And it's like, that is a degree of joy and happiness you don't experience without kids. And people are being told not to do it. Women are being told to go get jobs instead.
So why talk about it? What I'm talking about it because they're talking about it.
I gotta be honest. I kind of feel like when you look at a man or a woman looking at their children, or I'll tell you one of the most horrifying things. There was a viral video several years ago of a man holding his teenage son who died. And the sound he was making was like the wail of demons emerging from it.
Remember when we were talking about welfare?
It's horrifying. Like the amount of emotion you get from children is being cut out from people who don't understand it. And we're telling women who have biological...
This is why we need tariffs so that job opportunities shrink except for manly men doing man jobs. True. We solved the birth rate crisis. Manly men doing man factory jobs. The tariff. Let's go. We've justified it. We found the...
to go get jobs instead. To go get educated and get jobs. And I'm fine with education and jobs for women, so long as they're aware the idea of having it all is not the same for women as it is for men. Women have time that men have 7. Robert De Niro had a kid. He's like 7 years old or whatever.
If you'll indulge me a quick emotional aside, okay? I served in the military.
Oh my god. Oh, please. I just want to talk about poverty rates. Talk about the supplemental poverty rate falling and the consumption poverty rate falling because of welfare. Talk about. Poor God, I feel so bad. Please.
Enlisted in 2006, I got out in 2010. Very intense, very cool experience. It made people I loved. It very overall crazy thing. Got my 4-year degree, became a law enforcement officer, served for 4 years there. Also very intense, very crazy experiences. When I'm a rational person. I try to rationalize my emotions away from me. Where if I feel a feeling, I try to process it real quick, figure out what it is, and then push it away. When I had a child, I was not able to rationalize my emotion. It's so overwhelming. It's so powerful that I'm tired. Yeah, I'm grumpy. Yeah, I'm rude. Yeah, like all this kind of crap. But the kids are such an overwhelming, emotionally deep kind of thing that I think that getting drunk and trying to hook up with chicks or whatever, it's all, no offense to anybody in chat, but it's bullshit.
And I'll just add too,
bullshit by comparison.
If that was not the case, human beings would have died off a long time ago.
Sure.
Well, I mean, I think to you guys' point, this is, I think, in some sense where people from the left kind of come from, where we have this sort of solidaristic empathy for that kind of situation, right? Like, I think children especially are the most defensible group to give welfare benefits to, right? Because obviously children don't choose to be born into poor families, even to the extent that we might think that they're going to be poor later in life because of generational poverty. Well, there's still a really, really strong
You couldn't even say enough. I can't speak. You couldn't even say enough that we could make fun of his wealth tax or sovereign wealth proposal. I know. First of all, I will defend Econoboi and sovereign wealth taxes, for the most part. sovereign wealth taxes, sovereign wealth funds. Most of his tax policy is pretty defensible. He's just a little crazy around the edges, little unhinged. Always weird me out the obsession with birth rates and the justifications based in mystical experiences. I love my kids, but raising kids is expensive and taxing and not for everyone. Yeah, I know. Yeah, but sovereign wealth tax.
Intuition, I guess, that most people have that, look, children just don't fundamentally choose their circumstances, and so they should be very well supported by the community. And in this case, I'm using the state as kind of a proxy of the community, that you get some sort of basic benefits when you're born as a child. But I would just extend, and to the point that you guys are making, I would extend that same thing over to all these other groups. You know, people who have disabilities that aren't within their control, they should get a lot of support. People who want to retire.
I'm a communitarian as well, not a communist, a communitarian.
Yeah, yeah, and so that's what, and exactly. So if we agree fundamentally on that kind of thing, like you said, it's just really a question of like how much should the benefits be. And I mean, I think mechanically speaking, I was just going to say mechanically speaking, the best way to do these things is just to have a system of essentially universal cash benefits, and then for some, you know, if you have disabilities, like
finally,
you just have special benefits later on top of that.
But the fear is if we have a hedonistic, nihilistic society, then what are we incentivizing?
So what I was going to say is, I'm actually happy with a large welfare state as long as it's enforced with requirements and we don't tolerate hedonism and abuse to an extreme degree.
Okay, they're never getting back to welfare. Oh my god, dude, why couldn't it have been the Cato Institute guy? Oh, goodbye, Cat. He hates me. Oh,
I think a lot of people even on the right would agree with. Here's a guy who was a carpenter for 20 years, and then he lost his hand in an accident. Now he's struggling to work. Let's help that guy out. Most people are going to be like, okay. And the guy says, he says, I will do any work that I can do. I'm so grateful to all of you helping me. Then there's a morbidly obese homeless person saying, I refuse to get a job. There's going to be a line where it's like, conservatives and most people are going to say, I think most people are going to say, I will gladly help anyone who's trying, who helps help themselves and they need a lift up. Well, I don't like the abuse.
Before you jump in, Carl, let me just respond to that. So a lot of conservatives will say stuff like that. They'll say like, I'm not saying you're a conservative, but like, you know, a lot of conservatives will say stuff like that. They'll say, oh, well, you know, I'll gladly help the deserving poor, right? The people who really deserve their benefits. But then there's this group of people who, I don't know if we agree necessarily, but that is a minority of people who get benefits, like a very small minority. Most of these people that I'm talking about, again, I don't think there's necessarily bad behavior.
I think you're wrong.
Well, the evidence I think would speak against that. But
again, like no. Well, I can fuck Tim Pool. Tim Pool absolutely does not has not like read any of the evidence on what percentage of welfare recipients are, you know, what he would classify as their deserving poor or whatever. Connor might have, but I doubt Connor has done as much reading about that as Econoboi. Like,
the point is though is that when we start to say, oh well, in order to achieve benefits, right, you have to whatever, like you have to fill out so many job applications and you have to do drug tests and you have to do X, Y, and Z kind of different benefits.
Yes, finally, yes. Administrative burdens, yes. Universal, yes, yes. Finally,
right? finally.
The last fucking 20 minutes, yes.
That's a
welfare
apply to everyone who applies.
We're finally talking about welfare.
Right.
Eliminate those.
Well, yeah, and what we end up seeing, the reason I would eliminate them is because what we end up seeing is more government bureaucracy, right? We see more people who are paid just to file paperwork. We see those government.
We'll spend more time tracking the
right.
benefits.
We spend more time, administering benefits to government employees. And what we see is the deserving poor that Tim is describing, that so many conservatives have in their head, they are disproportionately the victims of stuff like that because their benefits end up getting cut.
In 2002, 39.3% of Medicare beneficiaries were obese.
Oh my god!
A marked increase from 32.5 in 97.
Oh my god!
In 2018, 42.8% of adults aged 60 and over were obese. So this is not. There was an issue of you don't take care of yourself and then demand I pay for it.
But Tim, let me ask you, because this is funny. This gets back to the Singaporean thing. I've been called an authoritarian before because I think that we should incentivize certain behaviors and we should punish other behaviors.
A weight tax.
Yeah, would you make the
weight tax?
Yeah, but
it's a real thing.
Maybe not a weight tax, but would you incentivize, like, for instance, let's say that we have welfare recipients who are receiving thousands of dollars per month or whatever. Would you say, hey, as a part of this, you need to show up to physical training Monday, Wednesday, and Friday,
Absolutely,
6 a.m.?
100%.
Well,
let's pause real quick.
Dude, I would love to see welfare beneficiaries working out on the side of the highway at 6 a.m.
The highway, they can be in a park. So let's break it down.
I'm laughing, but I'd love it.
There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Sure.
There are a lot of people who need help, and I want to help them. I make donations. In fact, for tomorrow's culture war, I'll be donating $10,000 to Wounded Warriors and $10,000 to Tunnel to Towers. I did that because Destiny offered $10,000 for the debate between Will Chamberlain and Peaceful Liddy. I offered to do it on culture war. He then backed off and said, I'm not giving money if Tim Pool's involved. So I said, I'll double it and help out more veterans and more first responders. I want to help people who I think deserve it. I'm a big fan of Tunnel to Towers. Don't know as much about Wounded Warriors. That being said, you want me to pay for your Medicare, but you won't eat healthy and you're morbidly obese? You are basically taking my money, spitting in my face. That is offensive. So if they said, if you came to me and you were homeless and morbidly obese and said, I need help, I said, here's what we're going to do. I am going to give you a place to live and you are going to drop 50 pounds. And if you do not work out with me every day, I will kick you out. That's how I would personally do it.
Listen,
I think that is fair.
The Marine in me is saying yes.
Yes.
Well, if it's bad, I think one thing to underscore is that if it's bad for poor people, it's bad for everyone, right? So like being morbidly obese is obviously bad no matter what. And I think with healthcare specifically, like you tied it to Medicaid recipients, like we have a completely, in some sense, a socialized healthcare system, right? Because you either have private insurance.
True. I mean, even private insurance, you're still drawing from a collective, pool of money. Like it'd still be beneficial to, obviously. Even for private insurance, even for people on private insurance, to reduce the amount of fat people, because then they pay less. Or, you know, they consume less healthcare, which means you still pay less in premium. So, like, we should just try to make everyone overall less fat. Anyway,
obviously
let's wait for Econoboi to say the exact same thing.
Cost sharing, or you have public systems, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, the VA, all that stuff, right? And so pretty much no matter what, we have this sort of communitarian, like we're subsidizing from the healthy to the sick. And so we have a generic problem with people being obese, right? And so if that's the case, then you'd want to have these kind of requirements probably for everyone, right? You want to have, you want to tax on healthy foods, and you want to
lower taxes for healthy people.
But this is where people get pissed, though. Okay, so for instance, talk to a libertarian guy named Lactoid. Talk to Fabian Liberty or whatever. If you're doing all of the right things, if you're working, taking care of your family, taking care of your community, and paying your taxes, people should leave you the hell alone.
But that's what insurance is, though. Insurance is like inherently like.
That might be Lactoid's position. I don't know for sure. To be clear, Fabian's position is let them fucking die. Like, there might be, I don't know where exactly Lactoid falls on the whole, NAP above, the children must starve, they must not get health care because NAP, but that's definitely Fabian's position. Nonfon wants to prop up the least productive members of society. Guys, ever seen that tweet? The ineffective altruism, the Make-A-Wish Foundation, we should have a charity for the least productive members of society, and it's like it already exists. It's called the Make-A-Wish Foundation.
When you need it.
Okay,
right?
but I want to. But I'm trying. Listen,
there's no avoiding subsidizing.
I
people
like the fat
with
poor
health
people
insurance.
working out at the park idea. Okay, I think this is brilliant. Now, whether or not it would ever get instituted is a different question. But the point is that, if you're gonna take from society, we're reciprocal creatures. We're competitive creatures, but we're also cooperative. So if you want to cooperate, then you have to give, not just take. One of the notes that I took is that, especially on the right, but definitely on the left as well, we always talk about privileges and rights. We don't talk about duties. Right? And here's the thing, even if you're a liberal or a libertarian, you probably have at minimum voluntary duties to your community, to your family, et cetera, et cetera. If you're statist like myself, there's probably compelled duties to your society. And so that's where you've been very great. You've agreed with compassionate beatings. That's awesome. Yeah. But there are people of your ilk who want to give all the money, but not have any of the duties.
Well, it's it's like when a parent is spanking the child and saying, it hurts me to do this.
It hurts me more than it hurts you.
Well, but that's kind of my point. I think that I didn't hear a great response to the insurance thing, with the healthcare industry specifically, right? We're all
Thank you. Yes, wait. I can't believe I forgot about that. Yeah, they did not respond to that. It just deflected towards fucking duties.
Right? There's no way to not basically subsidize someone's unhealthy decisions, this and that.
I hate that
Obviously,
Tim
you might
Pool is a
make
known
decisions
entity to normies, but the show name drops the most obscure 400 follower streamers. Like the audience knows who they are talking about. Well, I mean, yeah, but I like it because I am an obscure 400 name streamer, okay, 400 follower streamer, and one day I could be name dropped.
Some people, maybe through the course of exercise, maybe your preferred form of exercise.
I'm technically a little bit.
The person who drinks or smokes pay more in the sense that we should tax alcohol and smoking, probably. Pay more for health insurance, probably not. Maybe you can convince me. I don't know, but.
Wait.
Well, I can respond.
Well, I was just gonna. The last thing, maybe your preferred form of exercise, like me, right? Is like doing jujitsu and wrestling.
Probably smoking. I don't know. I could be still that people who smoke and drink should pay more for health insurance. Yeah.
That's a dangerous fucking sport. If I
we already do. Do they? I honestly don't know what you're allowed to charge more for health insurance and what you're not.
My knee doing jujitsu,
No cunt of importance knows who Tim Pool is. Very true.
I'm exercising, right? I'm doing.
I'm good.
Can I say? I can say it on Twitch, right? I think I can say it. If they let you say it in chat, I can say it on Twitch.
I'm good with that.
Well, but here's the thing, though, is that once we start saying you can do some disabilities are your fault, but some aren't. I didn't have to do jujitsu. I didn't exercise a certain amount. Again, this is a burden that's applied to everyone, even the deserving poor. And what ends up happening in practice, when we see all these different tests done from state level experiments to cities to federal benefits to different countries, what ends up happening is not solving the problems that you're talking about. We don't see obesity rates go down amongst poor people when things like that are implemented. What we see is the deserving poor that you want to actually help, they just aren't able to access their benefits.
It just means you need a better system. So
I agree.
For health insurance.
Oh my God, that's what Econoboi say. What do you?
A better system of distribution, which we do agree on. For health insurance is private.
If you tax cigarettes to cover higher healthcare costs, you don't. What do you mean? Well, I mean, you just mean what?
Your rates go up or down depending on your life factors. When I apply for health insurance, do you smoke? No. Do you drink? No. Do you exercise? Yes. They're like, your rate's cheap. Taxes don't do that. Taxes say one
yeah, they just mentioned it.
size fits all, and then you get a bunch of people getting money from me, and they're intentionally being like, I ain't gonna work out. Now, as for the jiu-jitsu thing, I'm talking about, are you putting in a reasonable effort to try and be healthy? If your disability is that you have no legs and you struggle to do aerobic exercises, so you're lifting, you can still eat better. And I think part of that welfare should be, when it comes to healthcare, proper education on how to be healthy. So that means your doctor shouldn't just be saying, you ate too much, your benefits are gone. No, it should be saying, for this week, we want you to try and hit these calories per day. We're going to check your vitals next week. And if we see that you're not improving or that you're doing poorly, you're going to put your benefits
I think
in
everyone should do that, though, right?
But Econo,
Everyone should, but if you are getting my money, it's a requirement.
yeah. So what Econo said, which I did hear, is you're adding. You have to structure these things properly. Where if you're adding these things, you're effectively adding an administrative cost to the distribution of the benefit. And so realistically, for instance, do we want to hire a retired drill instructor to meet up with homeless, obese people Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays? Well, you want to pay him $60 grand a year in order to work out fat people?
I guarantee you.
I mean, I think it's hilarious. I want to do it too. I just don't know if the rest of the American public wants.
Because they're wrong. The amount of money we will save on healthcare costs by having one trainer train people is more than we would spend on their healthcare.
Well, I mean,
listen, you're just no longer.
Them, Tim just doesn't have any evidence for that. Like Econoboi, I probably have papers on it somewhere. Am I fucking? I don't know. I haven't done it. I guarantee you, I have somewhere in my notes at least a Substack post that links to papers on this that say the opposite. But I don't know. It just seems like it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. It could conceivably be the case for healthcare. I don't know. There's that good Micah article. Means test is an inefficient tax. It's a good article. I don't know if it mentions healthcare, but
We're a liberal. That's all.
Well, but again, I think when we think about
That's what I am. But I'm telling you, if we're going to spend, if we spend $10,000 per person on 10 fat people, and we can
well, here's the good. I totally forgot about it. The nice way to phrase it, as Greg Mankiw phrased it.
Should face
for any means tested program, there is like an accountingly identical. That can't be the right way to phrase it. Universalized program that has lower administrative cost, right? Like, yeah, UBI provided all citizens of $10,000 per year, financed by 20% flat tax on all income versus the negative income tax targeted at citizens of zero income, where they provided $10,000 annually. This income is phased out at a rate of 20 cents for every dollar they earn, and then once it fully phased out, once they earn $50,000 or more, there's a flat tax on income from 20%. These are like literally the same program, other than the administration. They're the net thing is the same. The tax foundation has a here we go, means tested transfer, government taxes, all income, and 20% per year. These two programs end up being identical, but the program B would have lower administrative costs. Mankiw's a Republican war hawk. I don't know if he's a war. I mean, I know he wasn't he literally working with George Bush? So.
And the argument basically ran as follows. Plan A targets the transfer payments on those who are truly needy. As a result, it requires a smaller tax increase. Moreover, the taxes are levied only on those people with really high incomes. Plan B is crazy. Why should rich people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos receive government transfers? They don't need it. And if they give it to them, they have to raise taxes more to pay for it.
Grok Mankiw is the great.
Well, superficially, these arguments seem appealing. But here's the rub. As the economists note, these policies are exactly the same. Look at the net payment. That is taxes less transfers. Everyone gets exactly the same under these two plans. Person with zero income gets $12,000 per year in both cases. Person with annual income of $60,000 gets exactly zero. A person with income of $160,000 pays $20,000 in both cases. And everyone faces the same set of incentives, a 20% effective marginal tax rate for every dollar of income. In other words, everybody's welfare is identical under the two plans, and everyone faces the same set of incentives. The difference between Plan A and Plan B is only a matter of framing. Now, I bring this up. This is kind of obvious to the economists in the audience, but I bring this up because I think it teaches really two important lessons. First, if somebody finds something like Plan A attractive, which all my Harvard students did, and once they sort of recognize the logic that it says Plan A and Plan B is equivalent, they should find something like Plan B attractive. Many critics of universal basic income seem to fail to make this leap because they don't notice the equivalence of the two approaches. And I've had debates with some economists who didn't notice it the first time they saw it. But once you see the equivalence of Plan A and Plan B is much easier to embrace. I think it looks even better when you realize that universal benefits and flat taxes may be easier to administer than means-tested benefits and progressive taxes.
Truth nuke. Financed entirely by 20% middle class income tax. This is just the reason they do that is not because they think, this is an optimal way of taxation. It's just this is the easiest way to demonstrate the equivalence between a means-tested program and a universal transfer. There's a good article. I think this has 7 million people eligible for Medicaid or child health insurance program did not enroll. Similar story is true for the earned income tax credit, where the IRS estimates about $7 billion go unclaimed annually. Universal programs avoid this issue by providing transfers automatically. Yeah. Means testing may suffer from loss at aversion. 20 cents, 20 cents, no matter what. Or is it? A number of behavioral studies have found that humans are rational bias towards minimizing perceived loss. Yeah, that's a good article.
Cut that down to a $40,000 loss by hiring one $60,000 drill instructor.
Yep.
We good.
Well, I mean,
and they're happier and healthier.
Listen, I used to joke that I was an authoritarian centrist. I'm an authoritarian centrist. You're coming along for the ride, so I'm not hating. This is perfect. I would love to have Arlie Ermy working out fat people down at the local park.
See, this is what this whole fucking interview is. It's Temple and Connor jerking each other off. Well, Econoboi's in the fucking cuck chair. Yeah. Why is Temple like this? Why is Temple like this?
That'd be great.
Authoritarian if they're asking for my money. In exchange for my money,
voluntary.
you have to exercise. And it's not always about exercise. Some people can't. A guy who's got brittle bone disease, right, we need to make sure that you are being as healthy as possible. We're giving you Medicare and Medicaid. When you go to the doctor, if the doctor says, and I know that there's going to be corruption in doctors, but if the doctor's like, you are overweight. However, I do understand that your arms are broken and your legs are broken. We're not holding that against you. We are going to maximize. It's about being responsible with the money being gifted to you when you can't provide for other people.
Well, here's I think the difference between you and I, Tim, is that I think what it's more about is just what's the best way to do the things that you want to happen, right? Like, okay, like we have this problem. We have a bunch of obese people. I think the last time I saw was about 10% of our healthcare expenditure could be related to problems with people being obese, right? So about 1.6% of GDP or something like that, right? Which, is a lot of money, obviously. And so it's like, okay, well, what's the best way to reduce people's obesity and also extend the benefits that we think that they need? It's not conditioning benefits on a minority of the population.
It's not a minority. Well, okay, to be fair, 48% is a minority. Well, you can call it a plurality.
Well, I'm talking about like of the obese people, right? So of people on Medicaid who are obese, like that's what, 25% of people or something like that. So
if we're first of all, if we're correlating Social Security people over 65 and saying half are obese, we can do a blanket assumption that if they tend to receive Social Security benefits, then there's going to be a same demographic breakdown. However, I'd actually argue obesity is probably higher because that's why they're collecting benefits, because they are ailed by their obesity. As you mentioned, obesity is a large.
What? People over 65 are on fucking Social Security and Medicaid automatically, are they not?
Factor in why people are suffering medical issues.
Well, all I was going to say was that the best way, like when people are obese, it's because they have easy access to a lot of very sort of dopamine-hitting foods, you could say, right? And so the best way to solve that problem is not to, again, like if we have this aggregate problem with obesity, which obviously we do, the best way to solve that problem is not, oh, a minority of the population should have to go to exercise facilities or lose their benefits. The best way to solve that problem is, hey, universal system of health benefits, right? Which lowers administrative costs, which means there's less government bureaucrats, which is simpler administration. It saves costs, obviously, because the government can negotiate those costs. That's cheaper on that end. And then on the back end, if I was just going to say on the last thing, on the back end, the more efficient thing to do is to make unhealthy practices more expensive for everyone. That might mean, taxing sugar or, having taxing sort of caloric density of foods. Like these are how you align the incentives properly and efficiently.
You keep saying minority, even though it's not an established fact. So I will just read some data points.
Wait, what?
You keep saying how many people are fat.
You are saying a condition should not be based on a minority of people. Let me give you the data.
Tim, you said people on benefits who are obese. That is a minority of people. You just read it out. You said, what, 40% of Medicaid recipients? That's
no, 48% of people over 65, to which I said, likely people over 65 who are on medical benefits probably are.
What percent of Medicare recipients are obese? 21% of all Medicare fee-for-service. There's no, really? Only 21%? Taxing sugar, the Yanks, LMAO, they subsidize corn syrup, and we probably should stop subsidizing corn. Minority people can mean 49%. That's not a great use of English. I mean, I don't know. Nearly 1/3 of Medicare beneficiaries will be obese in 2030. Up from a slight 28% in 2010. Wait, it's not that much of a point of litigating this, but
they are more obese. Guess what?
You said Medicaid just now earlier. You didn't say people. You didn't say elderly people when you were reading from the AI or whatever you're reading from.
You are incorrect. It was 40% people over 60 in 2018. And I said if we extrapolate that, we can assume that you have about a plurality or half of the people over 65 on benefits are at that number, but it's probably higher. That's why they're getting medical benefits.
So you think of all the people, all the people in this country, you think most people are on benefits and obese?
84%. I just pulled it up. You want me to read it?
No.
How about I read it?
You guys are
among older adults with obesity. 84% have multiple chronic conditions, which is the leading cause of death among those 65 and older, affecting 32.5 million adults over 65. Type 2 diabetes, cancers, likelihood of mobility limitations and disability, elevated healthcare costs, and potential need for long-term care. That's the point. If you are over 65 and getting medical benefits, it is because obesity is a very likely contributor to this, considering half of people over 65 are obese.
This is not passing in the villages of Florida, by the way. They are getting wasted on golf carts. They are not going to show up to fat poor person golf. They're not showing up to Pete.
True.
Yeah, no, that's not happening.
We're going to let Econoboi respond. respond to the actual stupid ass
I'm not saying
point.
it's not a good idea. I'm just saying that it's not going
Well,
to
it's
work.
just that we might be talking past each other. When I say minority
The
of the
general
population,
population over a certain age is fat.
Right.
The people
No,
who
I'm
are
saying
on government
Of the
benefits will
people who are
likely be
getting
more fat.
of the people who are getting medical benefits, obesity is a significant contributor to this.
Like Medicare.
They're a minority.
obviously,
Medicare or Medicaid.
No, but I already said earlier that obviously a big portion of the cost that we spend as a healthcare system is because people are obese. What I'm disagreeing with Tim on is that, okay, we've got a population of people that are on benefits, right? We've got a population of people that are obese. We have an intersection between these two people.
Sure.
Why does
That
Tim Pool always
intersection
sound
is
like
not
he's yelling?
most people, right?
Because he's not necessarily yelling. I don't know. He's energetic sometimes that way.
Now, if we were to say, hey,
whenever he's reading out dumb shit, like
we have this problem where 10% of our healthcare costs are related to people being obese. Well, if that's the case, then we shouldn't only focus on people on benefits and who are also obese. We should focus on all people who are obese. And the most efficient way to do that is to have a universal system of public health insurance and making it more expensive to live that kind of lifestyle.
I have heard
Sugar
both.
cane
I
in
think
the
that a
lineup
substantive
for-
amount of this will not be possible because of the freedom that American citizens enjoy.
That's probably true.
The libertarian argument against you would be the people who are not on the government dole, who are not receiving public benefits, should not be compelled to any kind of behavior because they're not receiving any kind of benefit. So even if you're obese, but you pay your taxes and you're not on government benefits, you shouldn't have
But
to
when
show
it
up.
comes to healthcare specifically, they are still taking out of collective pots of money.
Agreed.
Either have public or private health.
You and I can break bread. Excuse me. We can break bread on the fact that during elementary school, middle school, high school, physical training shouldn't just be some guy smoking a cigarette telling your kids to walk around the lap a few times. It actually should be, this is how you do a push-up. This is how you do a pull-up. This is how you lift weights. This is the way your cardiovascular system works. Like all that kind of stuff. PT, physical training, should be a course that we take very seriously in America.
I got one you like.
For military preparedness as well.
Here's one.
Yeah.
In order to graduate high school, you should be required to do 3 months of basic training.
I have the opinion that
Compulsory service, basically.
listen.
No, not compulsory military service, basic training.
Well, but you're compelling adults to do a certain kind of
You
like
do realize
state-mandated activity.
you do realize they already do that for high schools.
Well, no, obviously.
So,
we have
so my high
compulsory,
school in Chicago required community service to graduate.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying what you're. I'm framing it in that way. You're just saying, hey,
I'm
in
not a
addition to the time
Apparently
after high
not.
school, you should have. I mean, like I think Switzerland has a couple years. I think Taiwan has the same thing where you can do like community
Israel.
service.
All right.
but-
1 month.
fucking Finland, a lot of Scandinavian countries do, and it's annoying because I was looking into fucking going to Finland and everything. But it's like if you get citizenship in Finland before the age of 30, I think you have to do compulsory military service, and it's just like Dumpling Boy never played sport. Well, that's not true. Fucking Econoboi does wrestling. He's a wrestler. I don't know if he still does it, but he used to. I know.
Month of basic training. My high school in Chicago.
That's not enough to learn anything.
3 weeks.
That's not enough to learn anything either.
All of 3 months is good. All of the high schools where I grew up required 20 hours, I believe, of community service.
Which is almost nothing. That's like a weekend.
Sure. Well, it was
better than nothing.
It was usually 2 weekends because you do like 4 hours a
do it
day.
over the summers.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, I was like, you can't make me go and do some random community service. How dare you? Now I'm older and I'm like, it's not that we're trying to force you to do something painful. It's that you're going to high school for a purpose, to be the best you can be, to be healthy and fit. And public school is paid for from my money. So if you want, first of all, there's a lot to fix. You shouldn't be compelled to go to high school. They do. If you do choose to take public benefit
Econoboi's the best.
to go to school, I don't think it's unreasonable to say, hey, at 18, when you're graduating for that summer, you're going to go to basic training. You're going to be stronger, you're going to be faster, you're going to be smarter, and you're going to come out to the workforce the best you can be.
Okay, I'll give my hot take since we're wrapping up and giving hot takes or whatever. So what I would do is you don't have the franchise. You don't have the capacity to vote.
Oh my god! Please, can we talk about?
You do
welfare,
2 years
welfare.
of military.
Dude,
Peace
fucking
Corps
30 minutes of this 2-hour conversation were about welfare. Oh my god.
volunteer style, like working for an NGO, or retail or restaurant. Because I swear to God, retail or restaurant is so brutal that
Well, let's be serious, because I would agree with you if it was service in some capacity.
Sure.
Meaning, you've got to provide some kind of community service. So that could be police officer, EMT, it could be firefighter, it could be a nurse, it could be a doctor, it could be working in a shelter, it could be something. It doesn't have to be the military, but in some way you provide a service to your
to the community. And we're never going to be able to get that in the United States of America, barring an actual governmental collapse. But I do think we would be better if we did it.
And that actually is a liberal
Counterpoints
concept.
was
People don't
born
understand.
rich,
Not a
was he?
libertarian. Starship Troopers, read it. Service guaranteed citizenship was you don't have to if you don't want to. All rights are afforded to you, but you don't get a say in how we run government if you don't contribute to that. It's not authoritarian in any sense of the imagination. So I would agree with, if you want to vote, you've got to do some kind of civic duty.
Sure. Well, when the government collapses, you and I can put our heads together.
I don't know if I would tie it to voting. I don't necessarily think mandatory service or basic training is necessarily a bad idea. I don't know.
We can rebuild society, and this will be a part of it.
Agreed.
Fat camp.
Selfishly, I don't want that to happen, but I think it might be like the same. Dude, as soon as I was out of high school, I remember being like, we should fucking ban cell phone. It was like the entire time I was in high school, like, you know, I you know, selfishly, you know, I was like, well, I want my fucking phone. My notes are on my phone. I want to be able to like Google shit on my phone and everything. It's like, I'm using phones in like a relatively productive way or whatever. As soon as I was out of high school, I was like, fuck, my opinion shifted completely. I was like, I don't know, the evidence just says smartphones are pretty, we just banned smartphones in general, true. It was like, the evidence seems to show that like smartphones are just like super fucking distracting for students. It's just ban them in classrooms, just ban them. I'm so pro banning them now. And you know, 5 years from now, okay, I might be saying, put all the 19-year-olds in basic training. I feel like it could be that situation.
At poor people,
again.
fat camps, compassionate beatings, and also service guaranteed citizenship.
We're going to wrap up now, so if you guys want to give your final thoughts before we go.
Yeah, so we did jump a little bit all over the place, but I am happy that we were able to agree on compassionate beatings for people, and then also on poor people fat camp. I think that was.
We did. I don't know that.
But my name is Connor. If you enjoyed, you probably hated my last experience based off the comment section. However, if you enjoyed this show, or if you enjoyed me in the previous one, type in Valor Media Network, common spelling VALOR. That is a new channel that's starting up. It's a bunch of first responders, military veterans who are all hanging out, talking shop, trying to be better men, trying to make the world a better place, all that kind of stuff. I'm live there Monday through Friday, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So if you enjoyed it, please come over and check us out. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. My name's Econoboi. It was really fun being here. I do want to shout out Matt Brunig. He's been pretty influential. I was very
I love that. Yeah, woohoo.
pro-welfare before I got onto his writings, but he helped crystallize a lot of things. And so if you're interested in reading more about that, you can follow his stuff at the People's Policy Project, or obviously my stuff, econoboi.substack.com. It was a really fun conversation.
I would not remember. Matt Brunig is goated on the welfare state, okay? He's got a few other crazy ideas, but I love Matt Brunig.
And yeah, I think my closing thoughts on this
sometimes
general argument would be
Matt Brunig's just an economist, lawyer dude. He was like a lawyer for the NLRB for a while. Ended up getting fired because he didn't like Clinton's welfare reforms. And he started his own Substack and think tank. Think tank might not be the right word. People's Policy Project might qualify as a think tank. It has a Substack, but also just has a website. That's not his website. But I don't know. It's he's a cool dude. He's a market socialist type dude, I guess. And he calls himself a socialist. I think a lot of people would not necessarily consider him a socialist, but
that look, there's a lot of people in society who don't work, who can't work, who we think like children.
This article by him. Universal benefits cost less than means-tested benefits. I think this even might have the same Greg Mankiw fucking thing on it, but he's cool.
Would have some sort of very fundamental.
I'm saying this so when I set up a podcast one day, he'll come on it and talk to me.
Right to benefits, and we need to give benefits to those people to help them. And certainly, the most effective way to lower poverty is to do those things. And that's pretty much what I tried to crystallize and argue for here. And hopefully, that was at least a good summary.
It was fun.
Of what we should do. So
We're back tonight at 8 p.m. for youtube.com/TimcastIRL. It's going to be fun. Don't miss it. We'll see y'all then.
Well, when they were talking about welfare, that was pretty cool, I guess. Did it talk about it that much? Oh, did it do it? Did it do it that much? Just didn't do it that much. Just didn't do it that much. Wait, if I play the video? No, it just goes black still. Fuck.
Statist. So ultimately, I do believe that women who are raising children
Is there a way
are
to
not
fix
like.
that? There might be a way to have it do something other than that. Because I could. That looks a little weird though. But anyway. Okay. That was interesting. A total Econoboi W when he was allowed to fucking speak. If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.